He hadn't been on a date in 8 years. Not because no one wanted him, but because every time he even thought about it, he heard his daughter's voice in the back of his head asking the one question he had no answer for. Is she going to stay, Daddy? He was terrified of that question. So he stopped trying. But tonight, standing outside a restaurant he couldn't afford on a street he didn't belong on, Mason Reed straightened his collar, breathed in cold October air, and walked through the door anyway. He had no idea the woman on the other side was about to say 5 words that would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself. Drop a comment with your city. Let me know how far this story has traveled. If it moves you, hit like and stay until the very end. You won't regret it. Son. Part 1. The Woman at the Door, Chapter 1. The garage smelled the way it always did at the end of a long Friday. Motor oil, burnt rubber, and the faint ghost of the cheap coffee Mason had been running on since 5:30 that morning. 3 cars still sat on the lift. 2 invoices needed signing. And somewhere beneath the service counter, buried under a stack of parts catalogs and a half-eaten granola bar, his phone was buzzing. He ignored it. Mr. Reed. Danny, his youngest mechanic, leaned out from under the hood of a 2009 Civic, grease running down his forearm like a river. You gonna get that or what? Finish the timing belt first. It's been buzzing for like 4 minutes straight. Then it'll buzz for 4 more. Mason wiped his hands on a red shop rag, moving toward the back office with the slow, deliberate walk of a man who had learned, through years of single fatherhood and small business ownership, that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Things broke. People called. The world didn't stop spinning just because you were tired. He found the phone under a 2022 Chilton manual. 7 missed calls, 6 from his sister, Karen, 1 from a number he didn't recognize. He called Karen back. She picked up before the first ring finished. Finally, I've been calling you for 20 minutes. I was working. It's Friday evening, Mason. Cars don't know what day it is. A pause on her end. He could hear dishes in the background, the sound of her life. A real, full, adult life with a husband and dinner on the table by 6. He didn't begrudge her that. He was happy for her, mostly. Did you forget? She said. He set the phone between his shoulder and ear, pulling off his work boots with one hand. Forget what? It wasn't a question. He already knew. He had known all week and spent the entire week successfully not thinking about it. The date, Mason. Silence. You promised, Karen said. And there was that edge in her voice, the one she'd been sharpening for 2 years, ever since she decided her brother had been alone long enough. You sat at my kitchen table 3 weeks ago, and you shook my hand. You shook my hand, Mason, like we were closing a business deal. I remember. And you said, "Oh, Karen, I will go on this date. I will put on a clean shirt, and I will show up, and I will try." Those were your exact words. I said I'd try. I didn't say I'd be good at it. Just go, please. Her voice softened at the edges, the way it always did when she stopped pushing and started asking. She's a good woman. My friend set this up because she genuinely thinks you two might. You don't even know her. I know of her, and so does everyone in this city, Mason, which is kind of the point. What does that mean? But Karen had already moved on. Lily's here with me tonight. She's fine. She ate. She's already in her pajamas watching something. You have no excuses. Go home, shower, and put on the blue shirt. He opened his mouth. Not the gray one, Karen said. The blue one. Lily already picked it out. He closed his mouth. She laid it on your bed this morning before school, Karen continued, with a note. Mason was quiet for a moment. Outside the garage window, the October sky had turned the deep bruised purple of early evening. A few stars were already out, faint and cold. She laid out my clothes, he said. She's 9 and she loves you, and she's been telling every kid in her class that her dad has a date tonight. Karen's voice caught slightly. Don't let her down. He didn't answer right away. He stood in his small back office, surrounded by invoices and oil receipts, and the accumulated evidence of a life built entirely around 2 things, keeping the lights on and keeping his daughter happy. Those were the pillars. Everything else had fallen away years ago, and he'd made his peace with that. Or so he'd told himself. Okay, he said finally. Okay, you'll go? Okay, I'll go, Karen exhaled. Thank you. The reservation is at 7:30. The restaurant is called Aldrich's. It's on... I know where Aldrich's is, Karen. Everybody knew where Aldrich's was. It was the kind of restaurant where the menu didn't have prices, and the waiters looked at you like they could tell exactly how much was in your bank account. He thought about his bank account. I'll figure it out, he said, more to himself than to her. Bank. The house was quiet when he got home. That specific kind of quiet that only existed when Lily wasn't in it. A hollow, slightly wrong quality to the air, like a song missing its chorus. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, just feeling it. Then he went upstairs. The blue shirt was exactly where Karen said it would be, folded neatly on top of his bedspread with the careful precision of a child trying very hard to do something right. Beside it, a single sheet of paper torn from a spiral notebook. Lily's handwriting, big and loopy, the letters still finding their shapes. Daddy, wear the blue one. You look nice in blue. Also, your hair does that thing in the morning, so please use the wet comb, not the dry one. I put something in your jacket pocket. Don't look at it until you get there. It's for good luck. Be kind to her daddy. She might be lonely too. Love, Lily, your best girl. He read it twice. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed, still in his work jeans, hands still rough from the garage, and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. She might be lonely too. 9 years old, his daughter was 9 years old, and somehow she already understood things about people that took most adults a lifetime to figure out. He pressed the heel of his hand briefly against his sternum, against whatever was happening in there, and then he stood up, grabbed the blue shirt, and went to shower. Chapter 2. Aldrich's was exactly the kind of place that made Mason feel like a man wearing someone else's shoes. The moment he pushed through the heavy glass door, he was hit with warm air that smelled like expensive candles and something being reduced in a pan with wine. The lighting was low and amber-toned. The floors were dark hardwood, polished to a mirror shine. Waitstaff moved between tables with the fluid, practiced ease of people who had trained for this, the way athletes train for competition. He was 10 minutes early. He stood near the host stand, hands in his jacket pockets, right hand brushing the folded paper Lily had left him, resisting the urge to pull it out, and waited. The host, a young man with a haircut that probably cost more than Mason's monthly electric bill, smiled at him with professional warmth. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "Reed, party of 2. "Of course." The host checked something on a slim tablet. "Your table is ready whenever you'd like to be seated. Are you waiting for your guest?" "Yeah." He glanced toward the door. "I'll wait." He stood there, feeling slightly too large for the space, watching other couples settle into their evenings with the comfortable ease of people who belonged here. Women in dresses that had probably been chosen weeks in advance. Men in jackets that fit. Conversations that flowed without effort. He checked his watch. 7:28. He thought about leaving. Not seriously. Not really. But the thought crossed the back of his mind the way unwanted thoughts always did, quick and embarrassing. You could just go. Call Karen from the parking lot. Tell her you tried. But he thought about Lily laying out his shirt. He thought about she might be lonely too. And he stayed. At exactly 7:31, the door opened. Mason turned, the way you turn when you're expecting someone. Casual, prepared, ready to smile and shake a hand and survive an evening. He was not prepared. The woman who walked through the door of Aldrich's was not what he'd pictured. He'd had some vague image in his head. A nice woman, Karen's age maybe, professional, pleasant. Someone he could have a polite conversation with and then go home and report back to his sister that yes, he had tried, and no, it hadn't worked, and could they please not do this again. Victoria Hale was 30 years old, and she walked into the room the way some people walk into rooms. Not performing it, not working it, just doing it. And somehow the room responded anyway. The amber lighting caught her differently than it caught everyone else. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress, simple in its cut but clearly not simple in its cost, and her dark hair was pulled back from her face in a way that looked effortless and probably wasn't. But none of that was the thing that stopped him. The thing that stopped him was the look on her face. Because underneath the composure, underneath the straight spine and the steady gaze and the practiced ease of a woman who had walked into 1,000 important rooms, there was something careful happening, something guarded. The look of a person who had learned at some point that walking into a room meant being evaluated and had simply decided to get there first, She saw him before he moved. He watched her recognize that he was the one waiting, some calculation happening behind her eyes, quick and automatic. And then she walked toward him. He moved to meet her. They were 3 feet apart when she did something unexpected. She paused slightly, and her gaze dropped, just for a fraction of a second, to his jacket pocket, the one where his hand had been resting, where the folded paper was. And then she leaned forward, just slightly, and said 5 words in a voice low enough that only he could hear them. "I know your daughter helped." The floor didn't move. The restaurant didn't go quiet. Nobody looked over. The world kept turning at exactly the same speed it always had. But Mason Reed stopped completely. Chapter 3. He stared at her. Not rudely, or maybe rudely, he wasn't sure. He was having trouble running normal social calculations at this particular moment. But he stared. "I'm sorry," he said. Victoria's expression shifted. Something small happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. The kind that appears when someone is carefully deciding how much of themselves to show. "Your jacket pocket," she said, still quietly. "You keep touching it, and you look like a man who planned everything except the thing in his pocket." A small pause. "My friend mentioned your daughter, Lily, right?" Something loosened in his chest, just slightly. "Karen told her about Lily. Karen told her you almost didn't come tonight because you didn't want to leave her." He exhaled through his nose. "Karen talks too much." "That's what people who love you do," Victoria said, and there was nothing performative about it. No smile, no softening, just a statement, delivered plainly the way people state facts they've learned through difficult experience. The host materialized beside them with the smooth inevitability of well-trained service staff. "Shall I show you to your table?" They followed him through the restaurant, past tables with white linen and small candles and the low murmur of other people's conversations. Mason was very aware of walking beside this woman, of the curious glances from nearby tables. Glances aimed at her, he realized, not at him. People who recognized her, who sat up slightly straighter or did a subtle double take. She didn't appear to notice, or she'd learned not to. Their table was in a quieter corner near a window overlooking the street below. The host pulled out her chair with practiced efficiency. Victoria sat. Mason sat across from her. Menus appeared, water was poured. And then they were alone with the candlelight and the silence between them and the entire awkward machinery of 2 strangers trying to figure out how to begin. Mason picked up his water glass, put it down without drinking. "I should say something," he said. "Something smooth, something that makes this less—" He gestured vaguely at the space between them. "Uncomfortable?" Victoria offered. "I was going to say obvious, but yeah." "How long has it been?" she asked. "Since you've done this." He looked at her directly. 8 years. She didn't react with the wide eyes or the exaggerated sympathy he'd learned to dread from people who found out that number. She just absorbed it, the way you absorb information that tells you something real about a person. "That's a long time," she said. "It didn't feel that long." He paused. "Until tonight." A waiter appeared to take their drink orders. Victoria ordered a glass of something dry and red without looking at the wine list. The casual fluency of someone who had spent enough time in restaurants like this that the menu was more of a formality. Mason asked for whatever she was having, which he immediately second-guessed, but the waiter was already gone. "Can I ask you something?" Mason said. "You're going to anyway." "How do you know that?" "Because you've been working up to it since we sat down," she said. Not unkindly, just observationally. He almost smiled. "When you said that, at the door, about Lily." He watched her face. "How did you know to say that? Right then? Like that?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. She turned her water glass slowly with her fingers, not really looking at it. "Because you were standing there touching your pocket like you were protecting something fragile," she said finally. "And you had this expression—" She stopped herself, seemed to recalibrate. "What expression?" "Like a man who came here because someone he loves asked him to," she said. "Not because he wanted to." The words landed quietly, accurately. "Is that bad?" he asked. "No," she said. And something in her voice shifted. Something honest. Something that had nothing to do with the restaurant or the wine or the practiced social performance of a first date. I think it's the most human thing I've seen in a long time. Chapter 4. The wine arrived. They drank it slowly, and the conversation found its awkward footing the way conversations do. Stumbling through the obvious questions first, the ones neither of them really wanted to ask but had to in order to get past them. What do you do? How long have you been in the city? Do you have family nearby? Mason answered his questions the way he answered most things, plainly, without decoration. Auto repair shop on the south side. 7th year in business. Karen was his only family in the city. Their parents had moved to Arizona 3 years ago. He'd grown up here, left for 2 years when he was 22, come back when things fell apart. She didn't ask what things. He was grateful. Victoria answered her questions differently. Not evasively. She gave real answers. But there was a quality to them, a slight compression, like someone summarizing a long and complicated document into the version that wouldn't require too much follow-up. Tech company. Built it from a concept she'd had at 24. 10 years of everything that entailed, which she left at everything. The company was doing well, which was an understatement he could verify from any business publication in the country, but she said it without pride or performance. Just fact. No family nearby. Her parents were in Boston. Her relationship with them was, she paused there, chose a word carefully, formal. Formal, he repeated. It means we have dinner twice a year and discuss things that don't matter, she said. He looked at her over his wine glass. That sounds exhausting. It is, she said, and the honesty of it surprised both of them slightly, he thought, like it came out a little faster than she intended. They ordered food. He chose something he recognized. She chose something he didn't, and when it arrived and he looked at his plate with barely concealed uncertainty, she slid half of hers across the table without being asked. Try it, she said. It's not as complicated as it looks. Story of a lot of things, he said. She looked at him. Then she laughed, a real laugh, short and unpolished and slightly surprised by itself. Not the careful laugh of someone performing warmth, just a laugh. Something in the room shifted, almost imperceptibly, but he felt it. Tell me about Lily, she said. And there it was. The one subject he never had to be prompted for. The one topic where he didn't feel slightly out of his depth, where the words came without effort. He told her. He told her about Lily's obsession with drawing. Not just coloring book drawings, but elaborate scenes, whole worlds she'd invent and populate with characters she'd name and give detailed backstories. He told her about the time Lily had spent 3 weeks drawing an entire underground city on paper bags from the grocery store, taping them together until they covered most of the kitchen floor. He'd had to step over it for a month because Lily wasn't done with the story yet. He told her about Lily's laugh, how it was too big for her body, how it came out of her like it couldn't be contained, and how it was, without question, the best sound in his world. He told her about the mornings when Lily would come into his bedroom at 6 a.m., not to wake him, but just to lie beside him, not saying anything, just being there, and how he'd pretend to still be asleep because he didn't want to break whatever that moment was. Victoria listened. She didn't fill silences with sympathetic noises or redirect to herself. She just listened, and her expression was, he noticed it because it was unusual, completely unguarded, like she'd forgotten, briefly, to keep the careful distance in her face. She sounds extraordinary, Victoria said quietly. She is, Mason said. She's the only extraordinary thing I've ever done. A beat of silence. That's not a small thing, Victoria said. That's actually the biggest thing. He looked at her. Do you? He stopped. No, she said, preempting him. I don't have children. She said it without added weight, but there was something underneath it. Not regret exactly, more like the awareness of a door that had been looked at and walked past. Was that a rude question? He asked. It was a direct one, she considered. I prefer those, actually, to the other kind. What's the other kind? The kind where people want to know something but don't want to ask in case the answer is complicated. She tilted her head slightly. Just ask. If I don't want to answer, I'll tell you. He filed that away. It was either the statement of someone very confident or someone who had spent a long time alone and had decided that directness was simpler than subtlety. He thought it might be both. Chapter 5. The dinner plates had been cleared. Dessert menus had appeared and been looked at and gently declined. The restaurant had thinned out around them. It was past 9, and most of the other tables had turned over once or twice, but their corner felt suspended somehow, separate from the rhythm of the room. Mason hadn't looked at his watch in an hour. He noticed that. "Can I show you something?" he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper. He smoothed it open on the white tablecloth between them. It was a crayon drawing. The paper was notebook-sized, a little crumpled at the edges from being folded and carried, and across it Lily had drawn 2 figures, a tall stick man and a shorter stick woman, sitting side by side at something that was probably a table, beneath a scattering of small 5-pointed stars that took up most of the upper half of the page. The stars were rendered in yellow and gold, some of them slightly smeared where the crayon had pressed too hard. The 2 figures were leaning slightly toward each other, just barely, just enough. Beneath them, in Lily's careful, oversized handwriting, "Be kind to her. She might be lonely too." He watched Victoria's face. She looked at the drawing for a long moment without speaking. Her expression did something complicated. It moved through several things quickly, the way a face does when it's trying to hold something in and the effort is almost winning. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to—" "Don't apologize." Her voice was quieter than it had been all evening. She reached across the table, not to touch his hand, just toward the paper, stopping just short of it, like someone approaching something fragile they don't want to disturb. She was quiet for what felt like a full minute. Then she looked up at him, and her eyes were too bright, and she said, "I need to tell you something." He waited. She opened her purse, a small, dark leather thing that probably cost more than his truck payment, and reached inside with the careful, deliberate movement of someone retrieving something they've retrieved 1,000 times but never stopped treating as delicate. What she placed on the table beside Lily's drawing was a piece of paper that had clearly been carried for years. The fold lines were permanent, the paper softened and faded the way paper gets when it's lived in a pocket or a purse instead of a drawer. The edges had gone slightly translucent. She smoothed it flat beside Lily's drawing. On it, in the small, uncertain handwriting of a child, younger than Lily, he guessed, maybe 6 or 7, were 2 stick figures. One standing, one smaller, sitting. The smaller one appeared to be hunched. The standing one's arm was extended toward the other, a rough crayon approximation of comfort. Beneath them, "It's okay to cry. I'll stay." The table was very quiet. "My sister drew that," Victoria said. Her voice had gone careful, not fragile exactly, more like the voice of someone who has told a version of this story before, but never this version, never this directly. "I was 17. It was a bad year. The kind of year where everything you thought was solid turned out not to be." She didn't elaborate. She pressed her fingertip gently to the corner of the old paper instead. "Emile was 8. She didn't know what was wrong with me. I wasn't even sure she noticed. But one evening, she slipped this under my bedroom door." Mason looked at the 2 drawings side by side on the white tablecloth. Lily's gold stars, Emile's outstretched crayon arm. "I've carried it since then," Victoria said. "It's been 13 years. She looked up. "I don't know why. I've thought about it. I don't have a clean answer." She paused. "I think it's because it was the last time I felt like someone saw me." The word "last" sat in the air between them. "Where is she now?" he asked. "Emile." Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. "Not much, just enough." "She died," she said. 6 years ago. An accident." A breath. "She was 22. "I'm sorry," Mason said. He meant it without qualification, without the usual reaching for something more useful to say. Just those 2 words delivered plainly, because sometimes that was all there was. Victoria nodded once. She looked back at the 2 drawings for a moment. Then she carefully refolded Emile's drawing and put it back in her purse with the same deliberate care. "Lily's right," Victoria said quietly. She touched the edge of Lily's crayon drawing without picking it up. "I have been lonely." The admission seemed to cost her something, but she didn't look away from him when she said it, which told him something. That she'd decided, sometime in the last hour and a half, that he was someone she could afford to be honest with. He wasn't sure he'd earned that, but he understood the weight of it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. And you can tell me it's too direct. The corner of her mouth moved. Go ahead. Why'd you come tonight? He gestured slightly at the room, at the restaurant, at the general situation. A woman like... He caught himself. You. You must get... asks me. She tilted her head. Constantly. Yes. So why this one? Why tonight? She was quiet for a moment. Because the woman who set this up told me something about you that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She looked at him directly. She said you'd been raising your daughter alone since she was born. No partners, no family support nearby. Just you. A pause. And she said you've never once let Lily feel like she was the reason you missed out on something. Mason said nothing. That's a specific kind of person, Victoria said. I've met a lot of people in my life. That's a specific kind of person that I don't meet very often. The candle between them had burned lower. Outside the window, the October street had gone quiet, the last of the evening traffic fading. Somewhere in the restaurant, a dish clinked softly. He looked at her. This woman who had built an empire and carried a faded piece of paper in her purse for 13 years and walked into a room full of people who recognized her as if each of those rooms was a small test she was always passing and never enjoying. Can I say something that might be weird? He said. At this point, she said, please. I came here tonight thinking I was doing my daughter a favor, he said, going through the motions so she could feel like she did something good. He paused. That's not what this is anymore, this conversation. Victoria looked at him steadily. I don't know what it is, he admitted, but it's not what I thought it was going to be. She picked up her wine glass, though she'd already finished it, and looked at it for a second. Then she set it back down. No, she agreed. It isn't. Oh, Chapter 6. The check came without either of them asking for it. Mason reached for it. Victoria reached for it at exactly the same moment. Their hands didn't touch. There was an inch of white linen between them, but they both stopped. I've got it, Mason said. Victoria looked at him. Mason, I've got it. This restaurant costs, I know what it costs. He looked at her steadily. I've got it. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she sat back and let him have it, and he was grateful she didn't make it easier than it needed to be, because the choice to let him pay had come with a kind of quiet respect that felt more valuable than the ease would have. He paid. It was too much. He'd figure it out next month. They walked out into the October night together. The air was cold and sharp, the kind of autumn cold that felt like an honest statement after the warmth inside. The street was quiet. Their cars were in different directions. They stood on the sidewalk outside Aldrich's, and for a moment neither of them moved. Thank you, Victoria said, for tonight. I should be thanking you. He paused. I almost didn't come. I know, she said. Karen told my friend. Who told me? A small pause. For what it's worth, I almost didn't either. He looked at her surprised. Why? She thought about it for a moment, like she was deciding which version of the truth to give him. She gave him the real one. Because I've done this before. Dates, dinners, men who wanted to get close to me and meant different things by that than I did. She looked at the street instead of at him. I've gotten very good at leaving before anyone has to. And you didn't leave, he said. No, she said. Why? She was quiet a second, then, Lily's drawing. He nodded slowly, understanding it. When you pulled it out, she said, I thought... She stopped, tried again. It just looked like something real. In a room full of things that weren't real. She looked at him. I haven't seen something real in a while. The wind moved down the street between them, lifting the edge of her coat. I'd like to see you again, Mason said. He said it plainly, without hedging or overqualifying. He'd spent enough of his life being uncertain about things that mattered. If that's something you want. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and in the half-dark of the October street, away from the amber lighting and the white tablecloths and all the architecture of a carefully constructed evening, she looked like a different person than the one who'd walked through the restaurant door. Not smaller. If anything, more. Yes, she said simply. He nodded. She nodded. They stood there another moment, and then she said goodnight, and he said goodnight, and she walked toward her car. A black sedan that had been waiting at the curb, a driver inside, which he hadn't noticed until now, and he walked toward his truck 3 blocks down. He sat in the cab for a moment before starting it. The heat from the engine hadn't kicked in yet, and his breath was visible in the cold air. On the passenger seat, Lily's drawing lay smoothed flat where he'd placed it. Be kind to her. She might be lonely too. He thought about the faded paper Victoria had carried for 13 years. He thought about the woman who had built a company worth more money than he could meaningfully imagine and who sat across a candlelit table and said, "I haven't seen something real in a while," like someone saying a true and difficult thing out loud for the first time. He started the truck. Driving home through the quiet October streets, Mason Reed thought about the gap between the life you build to survive and the life you might actually want, and how those two things can exist side by side for years without ever touching. He thought about his daughter, asleep at Karen's house, who had laid out his shirt and tucked a crayon drawing into his pocket and whispered something wise beyond her 9 years. He thought about a woman sitting in the back of a black car right now, on the other side of the city, with a faded piece of paper in her purse. He didn't know what came next. He hadn't known what came next in a long time. But for the first time in 8 years, not knowing didn't feel entirely like a threat. He pressed the accelerator, and the old truck moved through the dark, and the city slid past his windows like a world that was still, somehow, full of possibilities he hadn't accounted for. End of part 1. You said, part 2. Lưu ý, viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 2 lưu ý, viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc, kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, cấm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa, lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chi đàn bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Showmore 943, Claude responded. Part 2. The space between two worlds. Part 2. The space between two worlds. He didn't tell Lily about the drawing right away. When he picked her up from Karen's house the next morning, Lily was already at the front door in her pajamas and her rain boots, a combination she'd been committing to for the better part of a year, regardless of weather, and she launched herself at him before he'd even made it up the porch steps. He caught her the way he always caught her, both arms, her full weight, her face buried immediately in his jacket collar. "How was it?" she said into his neck. Not quite a question. "It was good." She pulled back just far enough to look at his face with the focused, skeptical expression she'd been perfecting since roughly age 4. The one that said she was taking a full inventory of his face before she decided whether to believe him. For real good or Karen good? What's Karen good? When you say something's fine because you don't want Karen to feel bad about it. He looked at her for a second. "When did you get like this?" "I've always been like this." She wriggled out of his arms and dropped to the porch, already heading back inside, already in motion the way she was always in motion. "Karen made cinnamon rolls. You should eat some before they're gone because I already had 3. He followed her inside, exchanging a look with Karen over Lily's head as they passed in the hallway. Karen raised her eyebrows in the universal older sibling gesture, meaning, "Well?" He gave a small nod. Karen's face did something quiet and satisfied. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. On the drive home, Lily talked about the movie she'd watched with Karen and a drawing she'd started on one of Karen's paper bags, and a girl at school named Priya who had the best lunch every single day because her mom cooked real Indian food, and how she'd asked if she could eat lunch at Priya's table, and Priya had said yes, and how that was one of the better moments of the week. She talked the way she always talked, continuously, comfortably, with the assumption that everything she said was interesting, which, to Mason, it reliably was. He let her talk. He drove. He thought intermittently about a woman sitting across a candlelit table saying, "I haven't seen something real in a while." "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah." "You're doing the quiet thing." "I'm listening." "You're doing the quiet thing while listening. They're different." She looked at him from the passenger seat. "Was she nice?" Mason was quiet for a beat. "Yeah," he said. "She was." Lily turned back toward the window, apparently satisfied with this, and went back to describing Priya's lunch. But he caught the small smile she wasn't quite hiding, the one she pressed against her shoulder like she was trying to keep it contained, and he felt something in his chest that was warm and slightly terrifying. He was not going to make promises he couldn't keep. He knew better than most people what broken promises looked like from the inside, what they did to a kid's sense of how the world worked. He was going to be careful. He was going to be slow. But he was also, for the first time in 8 years, going to make a phone call. He did it that Sunday afternoon while Lily was in the backyard with her sketch pad and the neighbor's dog that had taken to visiting through a gap in the fence. He stood in the kitchen with his coffee going cold and his phone in his hand, looking at Victoria's number. She'd texted it to him the night before, just the number and a period, no message attached, which he found oddly fitting, and he typed, "Would you want to get coffee? Somewhere less expensive." 3 minutes passed. He watched the ellipsis appear, disappear, appear again. Then, "I know a place on Meridian. Tuesday?" He typed back, "Tuesday works." Another pause. Then, "It's a diner. I should tell you that up front. The coffee is bad." He smiled at his phone like an idiot standing alone in his kitchen. "I spent 9 years drinking garage coffee. Bad coffee, and I have an understanding." A longer pause this time. Then, unexpectedly, "Lily sounds wonderful, by the way, in case no one tells you that enough." He stared at that for a moment. Then he set the phone face down on the counter, picked up his cold coffee, and drank it in one go because he didn't trust himself to respond to that immediately. Outside, Lily shrieked with laughter at something the dog had done, and the sound came through the kitchen window, too big and too bright and completely uncontainable. He pressed his hand against the kitchen counter for a second, just grounding himself. Then he picked up the phone and typed back, "She is. Thank you for saying so." He hit send before he could do anything else with it. The Tuesday diner turned out to be a place called Patsy's, a narrow, slightly battered establishment squeezed between a dry cleaner and an accounting firm on Meridian Street, with vinyl booths that had been retaped sometime in the early part of the decade and a coffee machine that made a sound like a small engine straining on a hill. The coffee was, in fact, bad. Mason liked it immediately. Victoria was already there when he arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a ceramic mug in front of her, and no phone in her hand, which in his experience was an unusual thing to see in a person who ran a company with 300 employees. She was in jeans and a dark sweater, her hair down, and she looked so fundamentally different from the woman who had walked into Aldrich's that he stopped for a moment in the doorway to make sure. She looked up and saw him looking. "It's still me," she said. "I know." He slid into the booth across from her. "You look different. Better or worse?" He considered. "Like a person?" She seemed genuinely unsure whether to be amused or offended by that. She landed on amused, just barely. "I'll take it." They stayed at Patsy's for 2 hours. The waitress refilled their bad coffee 4 times and stopped pretending to be subtle about listening in somewhere around the 40-minute mark. They talked about things they hadn't gotten to at Aldrich's. Not the careful, structured first-date conversation, but something looser, less organized. The kind of talking that happens when 2 people have already gotten the formal introduction out of the way and can start being slightly more themselves. Victoria told him about the early years of her company, not the polished origin story that appeared in business magazines, but the real version. The version where she'd maxed out 2 credit cards, slept on her office floor for 4 months because she'd given up her apartment to cut costs, and once cried in a parking garage for 45 minutes after a funding meeting went badly before going back in and doing it again. She told it without bitterness, but also without the cleaned-up triumphalism those stories usually carried. like it was just what happened. Like it had been hard and she had done it anyway, and that was the whole story, no lesson required. He told her about the years after Lily was born, when he'd been 23 and completely unequipped and running on a level of fear that had its own specific texture. Not panic, just the permanent low-grade certainty that he was one mistake away from failing her. He told her about teaching himself to braid hair by watching videos on his phone at midnight. He told her about the first time Lily got sick, a bad fever, 103, at 2 in the morning, and he'd driven to the emergency room by himself and sat in the waiting room with her on his lap and been so scared he couldn't speak. "You did that alone," Victoria said. "I had Karen." Karen wasn't in that waiting room. He looked at her. "No," he said. "She wasn't." Victoria looked down at her coffee. "I keep thinking about that," she said. "The version of you that was 23 and didn't know what he was doing and just..." She stopped. Just stayed. "What else would I do?" "A lot of people don't," she said simply. He didn't answer that because she was right, and they both knew it. And some truths don't need elaboration. On the walk back to their cars, they stood on the sidewalk in the thin October sunlight, and she said, "There's a thing next Saturday, a benefit for the Children's Hospital. I have to go. I'd rather not go alone." She paused. "I know that sounds like..." "I'll come," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." He looked at her. "I want to." She studied him for a moment with that calculating quality she had, the one that probably served her well in boardrooms and that she maybe couldn't turn off entirely even when she wanted to. Then something in her expression settled. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She started to turn, then stopped. "Wear something that isn't..." She glanced at his jacket, seemed to decide something. "I'll text you." "You're going to tell me what to wear?" "I'm going to make a suggestion," she said, strongly. He laughed. Actually laughed, the way he hadn't in a while, the kind that comes out before you decide whether to let it. "Fine," he said. "Strongly suggest a way." She almost smiled. It was becoming a thing he looked for. The almost smiles, the ones she didn't quite commit to. He was starting to understand that they meant more than the full ones would have. The benefit was at a hotel ballroom downtown, the kind of event that existed at the intersection of genuine charity and elaborate social performance. People in formal wear, an open bar, silent auction tables with items arranged under pin lighting, the specific acoustics of a large room full of wealthy people making conversation. Mason wore what Victoria had strongly suggested, a dark charcoal jacket over a simple black shirt, which Karen had helped him acquire on short notice Thursday evening, while offering an unbroken stream of opinions about his life choices. It was fine. He looked fine. He stood next to Victoria in the lobby and felt approximately 20% less out of place than he'd felt at Aldrich's, which he decided to count as progress. What he hadn't anticipated was the way the room changed when Victoria entered it. He'd registered the glances at Aldrich's, but those had been the polite double-takes of restaurant patrons. This was different. This was an entire ballroom containing people who knew exactly who she was and what her presence meant. And the subtle restructuring that happened, the slight reorientation of conversations, the small gravitational pull that followed her across the room, was a thing he genuinely hadn't been prepared for. She handled it the way she seemed to handle everything, with a composure so practiced it looked effortless but probably required constant maintenance. She spoke to people she knew with the warmth of someone who was good at warmth without being sentimental about it. She introduced Mason as a friend, matter-of-factly, and didn't explain or elaborate, which he appreciated. But there were moments, small ones, in the spaces between conversations, where he caught something in her expression that the composure didn't quite cover. A slight tension around her eyes when a particular cluster of board members approached. A fractional pause before she responded to a comment from a man in a gray suit who kissed her cheek in greeting and looked at Mason with the assessing gaze of someone calculating threat levels. "Old friend?" Mason asked when the man had moved on. "Former investor," she said. "Who thought investment came with certain privileges it didn't?" He looked at the man's retreating back. "Do you want to leave early?" She turned to him, and something surprised moved across her face. The expression of a person who has spent a long time at these events and been asked, reliably, how they were doing in ways that didn't really require an answer. "No," she said. "I'm okay." A pause. "Thank you for asking." They stayed 3 hours. At the end of the evening, standing outside on the hotel steps waiting for her car, she leaned against the stone railing and looked out at the city rather than at him. "I hate these things," she said. "Then why do you keep going to them?" "Because the hospital needs the money and I have the platform." She said it without resentment, just matter-of-factly, the logic of someone who had organized their life around obligations they'd chosen but still found heavy. And because showing up it matters, even when it's uncomfortable. He looked at her profile against the city lights. "That's a very responsible answer." "I'm a very responsible person. Is that something you like about yourself?" She was quiet for a moment. The car appeared at the bottom of the steps. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I think it's something I became because it felt safer than the alternative." She pushed off the railing. "Which is probably not a healthy answer." He said nothing, because he recognized the shape of that particular thought from the inside, and sometimes recognition was more honest than reassurance. "Good night, Mason," she said. "Good night." He watched her get into the car. He stood on the hotel steps for a moment after it pulled away, his hands in his jacket pockets, feeling the cold and the strange, unfamiliar weight of something that was becoming, slowly, unpredictably, in the way that things that matter tend to become, real. What happened next happened gradually, the way most meaningful things do. Not in a single moment, but across a series of ordinary ones that accumulated meaning without announcing themselves. Victoria texted him on a Wednesday morning, out of nowhere, to say she'd driven past an auto shop on her way to the office, and it made her think of something specific he'd said at Patsy's about the satisfaction of fixing something concrete, of having a problem with a solution you could hold in your hands. She said her job was almost never like that. She said she envied it, a little. He texted back that most days it just meant lying on cold concrete with oil dripping on his face, but that yes, there was something to it. She replied with a single period, which he was starting to understand was her version of a smile. He called her on a Thursday evening from his truck after a long shift, and they talked for an hour and a half about nothing in particular. A documentary she'd been watching about deep-sea biology, whether Lily's underground city art project counted as architecture, a memory he had of his father's shop where he'd first learned the word torque. And at the end of it, she said quietly, "I don't do this very often." Talk to someone without, she paused, without it being about something. "Is that okay?" A beat. "It's better than okay," she said. "That's what's strange about it." 3 weeks after the benefit, on a Saturday afternoon in early November, when the first real cold of the season had arrived and the sky was the flat gray of a city bracing for winter, Mason mentioned to Victoria that he and Lily were planning to go to the farmer's market by the lake. The one that ran through November with the apple cider and the booths with hand-thrown pottery, and the woman who sold kettle corn from a cart that smelled like the best possible version of caramel. "You should come," he said. And then, before she could formulate a careful answer, he said, "Lily would like it," which was true, and also not the only reason, and he thought she probably knew that. A pause. She doesn't know about me," Victoria said. "Does she? She knows I had coffee with someone on Tuesday. She knows I went to a thing last week." He leaned against the doorframe of his kitchen. "She knows I've been on my phone more than usual, which she's been treating as data." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like someone I'd be terrified to meet." "She's 9, he said. "Some of the most intimidating people I know are 9, Victoria said. He laughed. "Come to the farmer's market." Another pause. He let it sit. He didn't fill it. "Okay," she said. "Yes, okay." He told Lily that evening that a friend was joining them Saturday. Lily looked up from her current drawing, a detailed map of a fictional island country with its own flag, which she'd been working on for a week, and said, "The person from the restaurant?" Mason looked at her. "How do you know there's a person from the restaurant?" "Dad!" She said it with the patience of someone explaining something to a person who should really have caught on by now. "You've been smiling at your phone." "I smile at my phone." "Not like that." She went back to her drawing. "Is she nice?" "Yeah." "Does she like kids?" "I think so." Lily considered this for a moment. What's her name? Victoria. Lily tried it out quietly, mouthing it to herself the way she did with new words she was filing away. Then, does she know about the underground city? Not yet. She should know about the underground city, Lily said, with the conviction of someone who had organized a significant portion of her creative output around a single concept and expected it to be universally understood as significant. That's important context. I'll mention it, Mason said. You should mention it first, Lily said, before she thinks we're normal. He looked at his daughter for a long moment. This person he had built his entire life around, who managed consistently to be the funniest and wisest and most exhausting presence he'd ever encountered. And he felt the familiar, complicated warmth of being her father, which had no clean name but was the truest thing he knew. We're not going to pretend to be normal, he said. Deal? Lily looked up and gave him a very serious look. Deal, she said, and went back to her island nation. The farmer's market was cold and bright, the lake beyond it silver gray under the November sky, the booths strung with small lights that were already on at 11 in the morning because the days were getting short. Lily ran ahead the way she always did in open spaces, pulled forward by the sensory volume of the world. The cider smell, the sound of someone playing acoustic guitar near the pottery booth, the dog a woman had brought on a leash that was wearing a small orange vest. Victoria arrived wearing a coat that was clearly expensive and a scarf that she'd tied imperfectly, one end longer than the other, which for some reason Mason noticed immediately and found disproportionately reassuring. She stood at the entrance to the market, looking at the scene with the expression of someone who was taking it in piece by piece, recalibrating. Lily spotted her before Mason had a chance to make introductions. She stopped, mid-run, 3 booths away, and turned back and looked at Victoria with that full inventory expression, the one that took everything in. Then she walked over, not running now, with the deliberate approach of a person taking something seriously. Are you Victoria? She asked. Victoria looked down at her, something about the directness of it. The complete absence of performance in Lily's question, the simple, clear-eyed curiosity, seemed to catch her off guard in a way that board meetings and investors in ballroom full of wealthy strangers hadn't managed. Yes, she said. Lily considered this for a moment. Dad said you might like kids. Do you actually, or is that just something people say? Mason opened his mouth. Lily, it's a real question, Lily said, not looking at him, still looking at Victoria. Victoria held Lily's gaze for a moment. Then she crouched down, coat and all, right there at the entrance to the farmer's market, on the cold November ground. So she was at Lily's eye level. I didn't think I did, she said honestly, for a long time, but I'm revising that. Lily looked at her for another long beat. Okay, she said. Then, my dad says you run a company. I do. Do you actually go to work every day, or do people just send you things and you read them? Both, usually. My dad goes to work every day, Lily said, with the tone of someone who considered this morally significant, even when his back hurts, which it does a lot because he bends over cars. Lily, Mason said. It's true, Lily told Victoria. He should probably see a doctor, but he keeps saying he'll get to it. Victoria looked up at Mason over Lily's head. Her expression was complicated. There was the suppressed laughter, yes, but beneath it something else. Something that looked like recognition. The way a person looks when they see something that reminds them of something they'd forgotten. I'll remind him, Victoria told Lily. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied that this was now someone else's responsibility. Do you want to see my drawing? She asked. I brought it. It's a map of a country I made up. It has its own monetary system. A monetary system, Victoria repeated. It's based on shells, Lily said, but not actual shells because those are bad for the environment. The idea of shells. Victoria stood back up. She looked at Mason. He gave the smallest shrug. This is just who she is. And Victoria looked back down at Lily and said, I would very much like to see this map. Lily grabbed Victoria's hand the way she grabbed hands when she'd decided someone was coming along with her, without asking, without ceremony, just the simple assumption of welcome, and pulled her toward the pottery booth where the lighting was better. Mason stood still for 1 second longer, watching them go. His daughter in her purple coat. The woman in the expensive coat with the imperfectly tied scarf, being pulled by a 9-year-old's certainty. The guitar player near the pottery booth was playing something slow and a little off-key. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and followed them, and the cold November air carried the smell of apple cider and kettle corn. And somewhere beneath the flat gray sky, the lake moved quietly on its own, indifferent and permanent. He caught up with them at the pottery booth. Lily had already unfolded the map and was explaining the shell-based monetary system to Victoria with the focused intensity she brought to things that mattered to her, tracing borders with her finger while Victoria stood bent slightly forward, listening, actually listening. Not the polite half-attention of adults being patient with children, but the specific quality of attention Victoria brought to things she was genuinely interested in. Which she was, he could tell. The map was, objectively, extraordinary. This section, Lily said, pointing to a coastline she'd cross-hatched in blue, is where they mine the salt. They trade it with the inland provinces, but there's a tariff dispute right now. Victoria looked up at Mason. A tariff dispute, she said. The northern provinces feel they're subsidizing the southern coast, Lily said without looking up. It's a whole thing. Victoria stood up straight and looked at Mason with an expression that was either disbelief or admiration, or some mixture of both that didn't quite have a name. She's 9, she said quietly. Yeah, he said. Victoria looked back down at the map. Lily, she said, what happens if the southern coast just stops sending salt? Lily's head came up. She looked at Victoria with an expression of sudden, sharp interest. The look of someone who had just encountered a person worth talking to. That's exactly what the Northern Council is worried about, she said, because the coast knows it has leverage. So what's the solution? I haven't figured it out yet, Lily said. I've been thinking about it for a week. What are your options? Lily started listing them. Victoria leaned against the booth post, arms folded, listening seriously. The woman behind the pottery booth pretended to organize a shelf of mugs, but was clearly listening too. Mason bought 3 cups of apple cider from a cart nearby and came back and handed one to Victoria and one to Lily without interrupting. And all 3 of them stood in the cold outside a pottery booth at a November farmer's market, while a 9-year-old worked through the geopolitical structure of a country she had invented from scratch. It was, Mason thought, one of the stranger and better mornings of recent memory. They walked the whole market. Lily ate kettle corn until Mason made her stop, then talked him into letting her have a little more. Victoria bought a small ceramic bowl from the pottery booth, gray-blue, irregular at the rim, and said she needed something imperfect in her apartment. The woman behind the booth smiled at that in a way that suggested she'd been listening after all. Near the end of the market, by the far stalls, Lily found a booth selling handmade journals. She stopped and turned them all over in her hands with the reverence of someone encountering sacred objects. Mason watched her and mentally calculated. Victoria appeared beside him. She loves to draw, he said quietly. I can tell. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, without making a production of it, she said, Can I? He looked at her. She was looking at Lily, still turning journals in her hands with the careful deliberateness of a child making a serious decision. You don't have to, he said. I know, she said. He let her. She went over and said something to Lily, and Lily looked up with the expression she made when something was happening that she hadn't expected but was very interested in, and after a brief exchange, a negotiation, he could tell because Lily negotiated everything, Victoria carried the journal to the booth keeper. Lily appeared at Mason's elbow with the journal in her hands, running her thumb across the cover. She said I could pick the one I wanted, she said. Her voice had a quality he didn't hear in it often, slightly subdued, like a feeling too large for the usual container. That was nice of her, Mason said carefully. Lily looked up at him. She said Emile used to draw too, she said. She said Emile would have wanted her to give it to someone who uses them. Mason was quiet. The market moved around them, people and dogs and cider smells and the off-key guitar and the cold lake at the far edge of everything. Yeah, he said. That sounds right. Lily looked down at the journal, then she looked over at Victoria, who was paying and not looking at them, and then back at her father. She's been sad for a long time, Lily said, hasn't she? It wasn't a question. I think so, Mason said. Lily tucked the journal against her chest, hugging it, the way she held things that mattered. Okay, she said, like she was filing something away. making a decision about something, in the quiet internal way she sometimes made decisions before anybody else knew she'd made them. Then she went back over to Victoria, and Mason watched his daughter slide her free hand, unselfconsciously, without announcement, into Victoria's hand as they walked toward the last booth. Victoria's step didn't falter. She didn't look down with the uncertain performance of an adult, unsure what to do with a child's spontaneous affection. She just held on. Her grip adjusted slightly, naturally, the way you adjust when something fits into your hand. Mason stood where he was for a moment, watching them move down the aisle between the last stalls, his daughter and this woman, against the gray lake and the cold sky. Then he followed. That evening, after he'd dropped Victoria at her car and driven home, after Lily had eaten dinner and shown him 3 new pages in the new journal and fallen asleep with it still on the pillow beside her, Mason sat at the kitchen table with a cup of the same bad coffee he always made and stared at nothing in particular. He thought about the day, about the imperfectly tied scarf and the serious conversation about tariff disputes and the journal handed over with a sentence about a dead sister's habits. He thought about the moment Lily had taken Victoria's hand and how Victoria had simply held it, without fanfare, without the performance of warmth. He thought about how dangerous it was, this thing that was happening, how much more dangerous it had become today, specifically because it was no longer just about him. Lily was attached now, or attaching. He could see it, the way she'd filed Victoria away in some interior category that mattered, the way she'd said she's been sad for a long time, with the certain, serious look of a child who had decided to care about something and was not going to be argued out of it. And Mason, sitting at his kitchen table with his bad coffee in the quiet house, felt the edges of something that he hadn't felt since before Lily was born, before the careful, controlled life he'd built from the wreckage of being 23 and alone and terrified, felt the edges of wanting something that was larger than safety, larger than survival, larger than keeping the lights on and keeping a small girl happy. He pressed both palms flat against the table, feeling the grain of it, the ordinary, imperfect, real surface of his ordinary, imperfect, real life. He didn't know yet that he was going to be afraid of this, that the fear was coming, that it would arrive not in a single moment, but the way fears do, gradually, from the inside until it was louder than everything else. But that was later. Tonight, he just sat in the kitchen and let himself feel the dangerous, uncomplicated truth of what was becoming, and didn't run from it yet. End of part 2. You said, part 3, lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 3 lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mọi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo. Kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document. Chi đần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Shoda Moore 947, Claude responded. Part 3. What gets left in the light? Part 3. What gets left in the light? The weeks after the farmer's market moved the way November moves, fast and gray and full of small moments that didn't announce themselves as important until later, when you looked back and realized that was when things had shifted. Victoria started coming to the house on Delaney Street. Not immediately, not all at once. It happened in increments, the way trust gets built when both people involved have reasons to be careful. The first time was a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after the market, when Mason mentioned offhandedly that he was making chili. The real kind, low and slow, the recipe that had come from his mother and required 3 different dried peppers and an argument with yourself about the cumin. And Victoria said, without much preamble, that she hadn't had home-cooked food that wasn't delivered to her in a container in longer than she could actually remember. So she came over. The house was not a house that expected company. Not in the way Victoria's world probably defined company. The couch had a permanent dent on the left side where Mason sat every evening. Lily's drawings covered the refrigerator in overlapping layers, held up by mismatched magnets. A pineapple, a state of Ohio, a small ceramic cat with a missing ear. There were boots by the door that belonged to both of them, a 9-year-old's purple pair and a man's worn work boots, sitting side by side with the casual intimacy of a life lived in close quarters. The kitchen had good light in the afternoon, but one of the overhead bulbs had been out for 3 weeks because Mason kept forgetting to replace it. Victoria stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at all of it. "It's not much," Mason said from the stove, not apologetically, just as a statement of fact. "I like it," she said. And she meant it. He could tell the difference by now, a month in, between the things she said to be polite and the things she said because they were true. The polite ones came with a slight formal precision. The true ones were shorter and less dressed up. Lily emerged from her room with the new journal and a pencil behind her ear and stopped in the hallway when she saw Victoria, with the expression of someone who had hoped for something and was now recalibrating to the reality of it actually happening. "You came," she said. "Your dad said there was chili," Victoria said. "The chili's really good," Lily said, as if this was important context. "He makes it from a real recipe, not from a packet." "I don't own packets," Mason said from the stove. "He says that like it's a personality," Lily told Victoria, then turned and went back to her room, apparently satisfied, and Victoria looked at Mason with an expression that was close to helpless, and he shrugged one shoulder and went back to stirring. Dinner was loud and ordinary in the way that dinners are when a 9-year-old is involved. Lily talked about the tariff dispute, which had apparently escalated while Victoria had been away, and explained that she'd decided the solution was a joint maritime authority that neither side fully controlled, which she considered an elegant compromise. Victoria asked 3 specific follow-up questions that made Lily put down her spoon and stare at her with the look of someone encountering a peer. "You actually thought about it," Lily said. "I found myself thinking about it on the way here," Victoria said. "The shell currency thing is real, by the way," Lily said. "There were cultures that used it. I looked it up." "I know," Victoria said. "The Yap Islands used limestone discs. Cowrie shells were used across multiple continents." Lily looked at her father. Mason ate his chili. "She's good," Lily told him. "I know," he said. "I'm just going to talk to her directly from now on," Lily said. "That's what you've been doing," Mason said. "I know, but now it's official." Victoria laughed, that same short, real, slightly surprised laugh from Aldrich's. And Lily, who had been waiting to see if she could make Victoria laugh, looked quietly satisfied in the way she looked when a drawing came out the way she'd planned it. After dinner, while Mason cleaned up, Lily sat at the kitchen table with her journal, and Victoria sat across from her with a cup of tea she'd made herself, finding the kettle, the mugs, the tea, without asking, moving through the kitchen with the careful navigation of someone learning the geography of a new place. And they worked in the specific companionable quiet of 2 people who were both occupied and both glad for the other's presence. Mason washed dishes and listened to the quiet. He thought about how long it had been since the house had held this particular kind of quiet. Not the absence of Lily quiet, which was hollow, not the end of a long day quiet, which was just exhaustion wearing a different coat. This was the quiet of a full room, of enough. He turned off the faucet and stood at the kitchen counter for a moment, just letting himself feel it. Outside the window, the November dark had come fully down. The street was quiet. The one working overhead bulb cast its warm, uneven light. He thought, "Don't get ahead of yourself." Then he dried his hands and went to join them. This became, over the following weeks, a pattern. Not scheduled, not formal, nothing that any of them named out loud because naming it might have made it fragile. Victoria came on Sundays when she wasn't traveling. Sometimes she stayed for dinner, sometimes just for an hour or 2 in the afternoon. She brought things sometimes, Not grand gestures, nothing that would have announced itself as significant. A specific tea she'd mentioned liking, a book she'd finished and thought Lily would eventually want, once a bag of good coffee that she left on the counter without comment, which Mason understood was a direct commentary on the coffee he kept making and chose to receive with dignity. She and Lily developed their own rhythm, separate from Mason, which he observed and did not interfere with. Lily showed Victoria every page of the journal, narrated every decision, submitted the geopolitical developments of the island nation for Victoria's strategic input with a seriousness that Victoria matched without condescension. In return, Victoria told Lily things, small things, carefully chosen, about her own work, things that a 9-year-old could genuinely engage with. The puzzle-like quality of building something from nothing, the way you had to hold 50 variables in your head at once and still move. "How do you not forget things?" Lily asked her once. "I write everything down," Victoria said. "Everything. If I don't write it, it doesn't exist." Lily looked at her journal, then she looked up. "Is that why you carry that paper?" The room shifted slightly. Mason, across the table, looked up from the invoice he'd been reviewing. Victoria was still for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Partly." Lily absorbed this. "Because it's the thing you don't want to forget." "Yes," Victoria said. Her voice had gone quieter. Not closed, just quieter. Lily nodded, like this made complete and satisfactory sense. Then she went back to her drawing. And Victoria looked at the table for a moment with an expression that was doing several things at once, none of them simple. And then she too went back to what she was doing. Mason said nothing, but he watched her. The slight tightness across her shoulders, the way she held her tea mug with both hands after that, as if she needed the warmth of it. And he understood that the paper and the sister and the 6 years of carrying that specific weight were not things that had been put down. They had just been set on a shelf where she could function around them. And sometimes, without warning, something small reached up and pulled them back down. He understood that kind of grief. Not identically. His losses were different, the shape of them different, but he knew the way it could be completely quiet inside you for weeks, and then a 9-year-old asked one precise question, and suddenly the quiet wasn't quiet anymore. After Lily went to bed that night, Victoria sat on the couch with her legs tucked under her. A different posture than he'd ever seen her take in public, informal in a way she clearly didn't often allow herself, and stared at the middle distance. Mason sat at the other end of the couch, close but not crowding her. He'd learned that about her, that she needed space around her feelings before she could talk about them, and that the worst thing you could do was rush the space. "She was a lot like Lily," Victoria said eventually. He waited. "Emile." She looked at her hands. She had this relentlessness about her, about everything she cared about. She would just commit to a thing so completely. It didn't matter how big or impossible it was. She'd go at it. A pause. She wanted to be a marine biologist. She'd been talking about it since she was 6. She had plans. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. She had so many specific plans. "What happened?" he asked. He'd asked once before, briefly, and she'd said an accident and closed the door. He asked again now because he thought maybe the door was open. "She was hit by a car," Victoria said. Flat and direct. The words of someone who has said this many times and found that directness is the only way to say it that doesn't break them completely. She was crossing a street in Boston. Night. A driver ran a red light. A breath. She was 22. She'd just gotten accepted to a doctoral program. The room was quiet except for the sound of the street outside. A car passing. Rain that had started sometime in the last hour and was tapping softly against the window. "I was in the city when it happened," Victoria said. "I'd been too busy to visit that month. She'd called twice." Her voice went thin at the edges. "I was in a funding meeting when she called the second time. I let it go to voicemail." "Victoria." "I know," she said, quickly. "I know. I've heard all the versions of you couldn't have known. I've said them to myself. I believe them, mostly." She stopped. "But there's still the voicemail, which I have memorized. I've listened to it so many times. She was calling to tell me about the doctoral program. Her voice was so..." She stopped again, pressing her lips together. Mason didn't say anything. He just stayed where he was, present, not filling the silence with reassurance she didn't need right now. "After she died, Victoria, Victoria said when she'd found her voice again. I worked. That was it. That was the whole answer. I went back to the office 3 days after her funeral, and I didn't stop for about 2 years. She looked at the window. I built the company into what it is now during those 2 years, which is probably not a coincidence. A beat. My board loves to tell that story as evidence of my drive, my work ethic, my vision. The word vision had a slight edge to it. They don't know what it actually was. Running, Mason said. She looked at him. Running, she confirmed. The rain picked up slightly outside. Mason looked at the window, at the way the light from the street lamp was broken and multiplied by the water on the glass. I'm not going to tell you to stop running, he said. I don't think it's that simple. It's not, she said, but I think you already have. Slowed down, anyway. He looked at her. You're here, on a Tuesday night, sitting on a couch that has a hole in the armrest that I've been meaning to fix for 8 months. She looked at the armrest. There was, in fact, a small tear in the upholstery that he'd been covering with a throw blanket. The throw blanket had slid off at some point in the evening. 8 months, she said. I keep forgetting, he said, like the light bulb. The light bulb has been 3 weeks, she said. You counted? I notice things. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. I know you do. She held his gaze for a moment, and in it was everything they'd been carefully not saying for the past month. The thing that had been building in the spaces between the Sunday dinners and the bad coffee and the conversations about fictional monetary systems. The thing that neither of them had named yet because naming it would require admitting how far gone they already were. He didn't name it. Neither did she. But neither of them looked away either, and the rain came down on Delaney Street, and in the back of the house, Lily slept with her journal on her pillow, and the two of them sat on an imperfect couch in an ordinary room and held each other's gaze in the particular way of people who have already crossed a line without deciding to. Victoria was the one who finally broke it. She looked down at her tea, which was long cold. I should go, she said. Yeah, he said. Neither of them moved for another moment. Then she unfolded herself from the couch, straightened her sweater, became, slightly and inevitably, the Victoria that existed outside this house. Not the polished public version, but something in between, a version that had been slowly growing a shape over these past weeks. At the door she stopped, turned back. Mason, she said. Yeah. She looked like she was going to say something specific, something she'd been working up to. Then she seemed to decide against it, or decide it wasn't the right moment, or decide that some things were better held for a little longer before being released into the open air. Thank you for dinner, she said instead. Both times. Both times? The chili counts for 2, she said. It was that good. He laughed and she almost smiled, and the door closed between them, and he stood in the entryway listening to her footsteps on the porch, and then the sound of her car. He stayed there for a moment in the hallway, under the working light, thinking about the things people almost say. The thing about the life Mason had built on Delaney Street was that it was structurally resistant to disruption. Not deliberately, not consciously, but in the way that all lives built around survival and responsibility tend to calcify, gradually, into something that feels less like a choice and more like the only viable shape. He woke up at 6. He dropped Lily at school by 7:30. He was at the garage by 8. He came home, he cooked, or he didn't. He helped with homework. He put Lily to bed. He sat with whatever was left of the evening before the whole rotation started again. It worked. It had worked for years. The system worked. Victoria fit into the system in the way foreign objects sometimes fit into mechanical things. Not smoothly, not without adjustment, but with the kind of fit that, once achieved, makes the whole thing run better than it did before. Mason noticed this in practical, concrete ways. He noticed that he was sleeping better. He noticed that the ratio of evenings where he sat alone staring at nothing to evenings where he had a reason to use his phone had inverted significantly. He noticed that Lily had taken to humming while she drew, which she only did when she was deeply, contentedly absorbed in a project. He noticed all of this, and he let himself feel good about it for a few weeks. And then, gradually, from somewhere deep in the mechanical interior of him, the other thing started. It began as a thought he had one morning in November, standing in the garage watching Danny diagnose a transmission problem. It came out of nowhere, the way the worst thoughts do. He was looking at his hands, grease-stained, calloused at the edges, the hands of a man who worked for a living in a very specific and physical way. And the thought was simple and cold. She's going to realize. Not today, maybe not for months. But at some point, the distance between a Delaney Street couch and a downtown penthouse was going to become undeniable in some concrete way. And Victoria was going to look at the full picture of his life, the garage and the hole in the armrest and the light bulb that kept not getting replaced. And the math was going to resolve into something that hurt both of them. He didn't say this to anyone. He tucked it back where it came from and went back to the transmission. But the thought came back. It came back in different forms, as those thoughts do, shape-shifting, finding new angles. He'd read a profile of Victoria in a business magazine at the barber shop, waiting for Lily's trim, and the gap between the woman described on those pages and the woman who sat on his couch and drank his bad coffee felt vast and impossible in a way that it somehow didn't when she was actually there. The magazine Victoria had been on the cover of 3 national publications and had recently turned down an offer to join the board of a telecommunications conglomerate. The magazine Victoria moved in circles that included people whose names appeared on buildings. The Delaney Street Victoria helped a 9-year-old work out the foreign policy implications of a fictional maritime crisis. Both of them were real. That was the problem. He couldn't convince himself that the magazine version was fake or irrelevant. It was just true, part of who she was. And it made the eventual collision, in his head, feel more inevitable by the day. He started being careful in ways he hadn't been before. Not cold, he wasn't going to do that. He wasn't capable of doing it. She'd call it immediately. But careful. A slight modulation of how much he let himself need the Sunday evenings. A minor recalibration of the part of him that had been quietly, dangerously beginning to count on things. Victoria noticed within a week. Chassin, he should have known she would. She noticed everything. That was the thing about her, the quality that made her extraordinary and slightly exhausting in equal measure. She noticed the light bulb after 3 weeks. She was not going to miss a shift in him. She didn't say anything immediately. She let it sit for a few days the way she let things sit when she was gathering information before she decided how to approach them. Then one evening, when Lily was at Karen's and Mason had invited Victoria over for the express purpose of not being alone with his thoughts, she sat across from him at the kitchen table and looked at him with the direct, unadorned gaze that she reserved for situations where performance would be a waste of both their time. "What's happening with you?" she said. "Nothing." "Mason, I'm fine." "You've been—" She paused, chose words with care. "You've been present, but you've been holding something back. For about 10 days. She rested both hands flat on the table. "If I've done something—" "You haven't," he said. "Then tell me what it is." He looked at her, at the composed face that had spent years being a fortress and was only recently, only in this kitchen, beginning to show its actual structure. He looked at her hands flat on the table. That gesture, he'd come to understand, was her version of steadying herself. She did it when she was preparing for something she wasn't sure she could handle, but had decided to try anyway. He could have deflected. He was good at deflection, had spent years building fluency in it, the mechanics version, the "it's nothing, it'll be fine, I'll get to it later." He could have said it, and she might have let him, or she might have pressed, but either way he could have bought himself more time in the comfortable fiction that everything was fine. He didn't deflect. "I'm scared," he said. She waited. "Not of you," he said quickly. "Not of—" He stopped. Tried again. "I've been sitting with this thing that feels like I'm watching something I want and knowing at the same time that wanting it might be the thing that ruins it." He looked at the table rather than at her. Your life is—" He made an inadequate gesture. "I read a profile about you at the barber shop. You turned down a board seat on a major telecom company. I don't know what a telecom company is worth, but I know it's more than—" He gestured at the kitchen. "Mason," she said quietly. "I'm not fishing for a compliment," he said. I'm trying to explain that I think about this. The gap. I think about it, and then I think about Lily, and—" He stopped. The real thing, the one underneath the other things, had worked its way to the surface before he could redirect it. "I think about what happens to her if this doesn't work. She's attached to you. She's attached, and I let her get attached, and if—" "Stop," Victoria said. He stopped. She was looking at him with an expression that was complicated and intent. Not angry, something more layered than that. She sat for a moment with whatever she was holding, and then she said, "Can I show you something?" He nodded. She picked up her phone, scrolled for a moment, then she turned it around and showed him the screen. It was a photo. His house. Specifically, the front of his house in the early evening, taken from the street, the yellow light from the living room window, the boots on the porch visible through the window, the shadow of what was probably Lily moving across the lit rectangle of the glass. He looked at it for a moment. "When, 2 weeks ago," she said, "I was driving home. I don't know why I drove past." She pulled the phone back, looked at the photo for a second, then set it face down on the table. "I don't do that. I don't drive past people's houses. I don't—" She stopped. Her composure was doing what it sometimes did when she got very honest. It didn't crack exactly, just showed its seams. "I have spent most of my adult life being the person other people want something from. My investors, my board, my parents, in their own way. People who called themselves friends." Her voice was steady, but her hands, still flat on the table, pressed down slightly, like she was holding something in through her palms. "And then I sat across from you at Aldrich's, and you were just completely yourself. You weren't managing me. You weren't impressed by the wrong things. You were nervous because you hadn't done this in 8 years, and you paid a check you couldn't afford because it mattered to you, and you drove home in a truck that's 10 years old, and—" She stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. "The gap you're worried about," she said, "I don't experience it the way you think I do. I experience it in reverse." She looked at him directly. "Your life is the real one. Mine is the one that's been constructed. I built it brick by brick because I didn't know what else to build." A pause. "Your daughter looked at me and asked if I actually liked kids. Nobody has asked me a real question in years, Mason. Not like that. Not without wanting something first." He looked at her. "I'm not asking you to ignore the differences," she said. "They exist. I know they exist. But I need you to stop using them as a reason to start walking away before anything has actually gone wrong." Her voice had gone slightly rough at the edges. "Because I have done that. I am very good at doing that. And I came here tonight because I was hoping you weren't going to make me watch you do it first." The refrigerator hummed. The rain that had become a fixture of the last 3 weeks tapped at the window. Mason looked at this woman across his kitchen table, with her composed face showing its seams and her hands pressing flat and her voice rough at the edges. And he thought about the faded paper in her purse, and the voicemail she'd memorized, and the years she'd spent running, and the photo she'd taken of his lit window from the street like a person looking at something they wanted but hadn't given themselves permission for. "I'm not walking away," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I'm just scared," he said. "I'm allowed to be scared." "Yes," she said, "you are." A pause. "So am I." He reached across the table. He didn't touch her hand. He placed his hand near hers, the same not quite touching as the night at Aldrich's, same inch of table between them. And this time, after a moment, she closed the inch. Her hand was cold. He wrapped both of his around it. She let him. They sat like that for a while, in the kitchen on Delaney Street, under the one working light, while the rain came down outside and both of them stayed. November became December. The cold came in earnest now, the kind that had edges to it, that got into your jacket if you stood still too long. Lily demanded that the house have Christmas lights on the porch, which Mason put up on a Saturday afternoon while she supervised from below with the authority of a woman who had been waiting for this specific task for weeks and had strong opinions about even distribution. Victoria showed up halfway through the process with coffee. Good coffee this time, from the place on Meridian, not Patsy's, and stood in the cold watching Mason on the ladder, with a look on her face that she didn't know he could see from up there. It was a look he recognized because it was the same one he tried to keep off his face when she wasn't watching. The look of someone doing an internal accounting of something they have and the awareness, simultaneous and slightly painful, of how much it would cost to lose it. "You're going to fall," she said when he looked down. "I've been on ladders my entire life," he said. "The light string is tangled on the left side." "I can see that." "Do you want me to—" "I've got it." "You don't have it. The left side is clearly—" "Victoria." Yes? Go stand with Lily. A pause. Then, she's already given me instructions. I'm the quality control. Then control the quality from over there, he said. From below, Lily made a sound that was suspiciously like a suppressed laugh. Mason stayed on the ladder, working through the tangle, and below him Victoria moved to stand beside Lily, and Lily, without looking up, leaned slightly against her, and Victoria looked down at her with that expression that had no name. And Mason, up on the ladder with cold hands and tangled lights, felt the full complicated weight of the thing that was happening on his porch. He got the lights untangled. He came down the ladder. The three of them stood back and looked at the house. The lights were not perfect. They were bunched in one section and slightly sparse in another, and one bulb on the left string was already out. But they were on, and the porch was lit, and the house on Delaney Street glowed orange-white against the December dark. It's crooked, Lily said. I know, Mason said. I like it, Victoria said. Lily looked at her. Crooked? Imperfect, Victoria said. She looked at the house with the lights on, at the glow in the windows behind the porch, at the mismatched boots still by the front door where they always were. I like things that look like someone actually lives there. Lily considered this for a moment with great seriousness. Then she looked at Mason. Can she come for Christmas? She said. He looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Lily, then at Mason, with the expression of someone who had not expected that sentence and was doing rapid internal calculations about what to do with it. You don't have to answer that, Mason said to Victoria. I want to, Victoria said, not to him but to Lily. Yes, if it's okay with your dad. Lily looked at Mason with the expression of a person who considered the answer to this question so obvious as to barely merit the question. Dad, she said. Yeah, he said. It's okay with her dad. Lily nodded once, gravely, and then walked inside, apparently having resolved all the important business of the evening. Mason and Victoria stood on the porch under the imperfect Christmas lights. You don't have to actually, he started. I want to, she said. And there it was, the short, undressed version, the one that was true. She looked at the lit house, then at him. I haven't had a Christmas that felt like... She stopped, tried again. The last real Christmas I remember was with Emile. We were at my parents' house, which was large and cold, and Emile had spent 3 weeks making these paper ornaments by hand because she'd read about Japanese origami. The tree looked... She smiled, and it was a real one, whole. Not the almost smile, and it changed her entire face. It looked like a craft project escaped from a second-grade classroom. He looked at her. I want a Christmas that looks like that again, she said quietly. Imperfect. Like someone actually lives there. He said nothing. He reached over and put his arm around her shoulders. The first time he'd done it, the first time he'd taken that specific physical step. And she leaned into it, not dramatically, just the slight adjustment of weight that meant, yes, this is okay. This is where I want to be. They stood on the porch of the house on Delaney Street, under the crooked Christmas lights, and the cold December night pressed in around them. And inside the house, the refrigerator hummed, and Lily's drawings covered the fridge door, and the one bad light bulb was still bad, and none of it was perfect. And Mason held on to the woman beside him, like someone who had decided, for the first time in a long time, to hold on to something. End of part 3. You said part 4, Louis. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 4, lưu ý, viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sang. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời, trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chi đần bắt buộc không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Showmore 951 Claude responded, Part 4. The distance between staying and leaving. Part 4. The distance between staying and leaving. Christmas came and went the way Christmas does when a child is involved, loudly, incompletely, with wrapping paper on the floor for 3 days, and a specific kind of exhausted happiness that lingers in a house like wood smoke. Victoria came on Christmas Eve. She brought things, not extravagantly, nothing that would have made Mason uncomfortable in the way large gestures sometimes did, but carefully chosen. A set of drawing pencils for Lily in a wooden case with her name engraved on the lid, which Lily received with the reverence of someone receiving a professional tool they'd been waiting to deserve. For Mason, a socket set so precisely calibrated to the gaps in his garage inventory that he stood in the kitchen holding it and trying to figure out how she'd known, until he remembered a conversation 3 weeks earlier when he'd mentioned offhandedly that his 3/8 drive was stripped. She'd remembered. She'd filed it away and gone and found exactly the right thing. He stood in his kitchen holding a socket set and felt something shift in him that he couldn't fully name. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," she said. She was watching Lily open the pencil case for the 4th time, running her fingers across the name on the lid. "I wanted to." Lily went to bed late that night, resisting sleep with the focused determination of a child who understood that Christmas morning required sleep, but also suspected that something interesting might happen if she stayed awake long enough. Mason negotiated a compromise involving 1 more cup of cocoa and 2 more pages of the journal, and then carried her to bed at 11:15, already mostly asleep by the time he got her there, one hand still curled around a pencil. He came back to the living room to find Victoria sitting on the couch with her knees drawn up, looking at the Christmas tree in the corner. A real one, 6 feet, that he and Lily had cut themselves at a farm 40 minutes outside the city 2 weeks earlier, and that had dropped needles with increasing enthusiasm ever since. It was decorated with Lily's ornaments, which were a chaotic and deeply personal collection. Handmade paper ones, a ceramic hand from 1st grade, a plastic dinosaur wearing a tiny Santa hat, a small photo of Mason and Lily from when she was 3 that she'd found and insisted on, and that Mason had been looking at from across the room all evening with the complicated emotion of a person confronted with how much time had passed. Victoria was looking at the tree the way she sometimes looked at things when she thought no one was watching, with her guard fully down, with something open in her face. "It looks like a craft project from a 2nd grade classroom," Mason said quietly from the doorway. She looked up. The smile that crossed her face was the whole one, the real one, and it was brief and unguarded. "Yes," she said, "exactly like that." He sat beside her. Not at the other end of the couch this time, beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. She didn't move away. She leaned in, slightly, and they sat together in front of the imperfect tree and the living room that smelled like pine needles, and the cocoa he'd burned slightly at the bottom of the pan. And the house was quiet in the specific way it was quiet when Lily was asleep. Not hollow, just still. "My parents had a decorator," Victoria said, "for the tree, every year. A woman who came with a color scheme." She was quiet for a moment. "One year the scheme was all white and silver. It looked like a magazine photo." Another pause. "I remember thinking it didn't feel like ours." "Ours is definitely ours," Mason said. "The dinosaur in the Santa hat is particularly yours," she said. "Lily found that at a garage sale when she was 6. She paid $1/4 for it. She will put it on every tree she ever has for the rest of her life." Victoria looked at the dinosaur. "Good," she said. They stayed there until past midnight. They talked about things that didn't have agendas. Her mother's formal Christmas Eve dinners, his memory of helping his father string lights along a roof line and dropping the extension cord 3 times, the year Lily had been convinced, with total conviction, that Santa had left footprints in the backyard that turned out to be a raccoon. They talked the way they'd been learning to talk, without architecture, without the slight performance of 2 people still figuring out what they were to each other. When she left, in the cold midnight quiet of Christmas Eve, He stood on the porch under the imperfect lights and watched her car pull away. And he thought, this is the thing. Whatever it was, whatever name it was going to eventually require, this was it. He'd stopped being able to pretend he didn't know that. What he couldn't have predicted was how soon afterward the fear would come back. Not the gentle, manageable fear from November. The kind he'd been able to hold a conversation about. The other kind. The kind with real teeth. It arrived in the first week of January, in the form of a man named Graham Holt. Mason didn't know who Graham Holt was until Karen mentioned him, casually, over the phone on a Tuesday evening. Had Mason seen the piece in the business section about the Hail Tech partnership announcement? Graham Holt from Meridian Capital, apparently a longtime associate of Victoria's, a very significant deal, front page of the business section. Mason hadn't seen it. He found it online. He read it. The article was about a major financing partnership between Hail Tech and Meridian Capital, a deal that had apparently been in negotiation for months. There were quotes from Victoria that sounded exactly like her. Precise, minimal, pointed. There was a photo from the announcement event. Victoria in a gray suit at a podium, and to her left, slightly behind her, a man who the caption identified as Graham Holt. He was the kind of man that photographs well. Tall, dark suit, the easy posture of someone who has been in rooms like this his entire life. The caption noted he was 34. The article described him as one of the more significant figures in private equity in the region, a long-standing professional contact of Victoria's who was expected to join the Hail Tech Advisory Board. Mason read the article twice. Then he put his phone face down on the counter and went to check on Lily, who was already asleep, and stood in her doorway for a moment looking at her in the dark. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself he was being irrational. He told himself that Victoria's professional life was full of men in good suits, and that this was not something he was going to spiral about. He spiraled about it for 5 days. Not outwardly. He was too controlled for that. Had built too much of his daily functioning around the management of internal states that couldn't be allowed to affect his work or his daughter. Outwardly, he was fine. He answered Victoria's texts with normal response times. He had a normal phone call with her on Thursday. He was normal. But the thing that had always been underneath, the gap, the distance, the fundamental difference between their worlds, had found a face now. A specific photographed face in a gray suit. And it was louder than it had been. He knew it was irrational. That was the particular cruelty of that kind of fear. Knowing it was irrational did nothing to diminish it. The rational mind could hold all the right arguments, and the fear could simply ignore them. What it kept saying, in the cold logic of 3 a.m, was this. She has a whole life. A world. A world full of Graham Holts who speak her language and understand her work and don't feel out of place at benefit dinners. And you are a mechanic on Delaney Street who bought a socket set for a first date and dropped the extension cord 3 times. He started canceling things. Not dramatically, just small retreats. A Sunday where he said he had garage work, which was true, but not the whole truth. A phone call cut shorter than usual because he was tired, which was also true. He told himself he was just recalibrating, just being careful, just not putting all of his weight on something that might not hold. Victoria let it go for 1 week. Then she texted him on a Wednesday. "Are you doing the thing again?" He stared at the message for 10 minutes. He typed back, "What thing?" Her response was immediate. The thing where you get scared and start managing the distance before anything has actually happened. He put the phone down, picked it up, typed, "I'm fine." 3 seconds. "You're not fine. You're protecting yourself." Which I understand, but I'd rather you tell me directly. He sat in his truck in the garage parking lot and looked at that message and felt the familiar trapped sensation of being known by someone, of having the internal architecture seen. He typed, "I read about the Meridian Capital deal." A longer pause this time, then, "Okay." "The photo," he typed. "Graham Holt." Another pause. Longer. "Can you come over tonight?" she wrote. Not a question. He went. Her apartment was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and he'd been here twice before. Once briefly to pick her up for something. Once for a dinner she'd cooked with the focused determination of someone who had decided to learn how to cook and was not going to be defeated by a chicken. It was a large apartment, clean-lined and well-furnished, with enormous windows that looked out over the city and very little on the walls except one photograph, a framed print of a coastline that he didn't recognize, somewhere gray and rocky. There was nothing personal in it. That was the thing he always noticed. It was beautiful and it was impersonal, the way hotels are beautiful, the way places are beautiful when no one has left anything of themselves in them. Except, he noticed now, on the kitchen counter, the small gray-blue ceramic bowl she'd bought at the farmer's market, sitting there with a few keys in it. She handed him a beer. She had wine. They sat at her kitchen table, which was clean and uncluttered in a way his never was, and she looked at him with the direct, unarmored gaze that she brought to hard conversations. "Tell me what happened in your head," she said. "I read an article," he said, "about a business deal." "About your world," he said. "The real one. The one where—" He stopped. "Graham Holt has an MBA from Wharton. I looked him up. I know what Graham has," she said. "I've worked with him for 3 years. Do you—" He stopped again, made himself say it. "Is there anything there, with him?" Victoria looked at him steadily. "No," she said, flat and direct. "There never has been. He asked me to dinner 2 years ago and I said no. He was professional about it. We have a working relationship and that's the entirety of it." She paused. "Is that what this is about? You thought—" "Not exactly," Mason said. It's not about him specifically. It's about what he represents." He looked at the table. "He's the right kind of man for your life. The kind who fits, who makes sense in a photo next to you." He met her eyes. "I don't make sense in that photo, Victoria." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't care about the photo," she said. "You should." "Why?" "Because you have a company and a board and investors and—" He pressed his palm flat on the table, the gesture he'd learned from her without realizing it. "I fix cars. I live on Delaney Street. I can't take you to the places your life requires you to go." "You took me to Patsy's," she said. "That's not what I mean." "I know what you mean." Her voice was tight now, not angry, controlled in the way she got controlled when she was holding something in. "You mean that you've decided in the privacy of your own head over the last week that this doesn't make sense and that I should be with someone whose life looks like mine on paper." She looked at him. "And rather than talking to me about it, you started pulling away." He didn't answer because she was exactly right. "I need to tell you something," she said. She stood up, and for a moment he thought she was ending the conversation, but she walked to the window instead and looked out at the city. The city was lit and enormous below her, the way cities look from height, like something that contains everything, like it could go on forever. "I had a relationship," she said to the window, 3 years ago. His name was Daniel. He was an architect, very successful. We moved in the same circles. He understood my work, my schedule, the demands of running a company. Our lives made sense together on paper." She paused. "We dated for 14 months. Mason waited. "He was the right kind of man," she said. Her voice had gone quiet. "Exactly the right kind of man for my life, and I tried. I tried to be what that was supposed to look like." She turned from the window. "But he wanted the Victoria that made sense in the photo. He wanted the CEO at the podium. He didn't want—" She stopped. "He told me once during a fight that I was easier to be around at work events than at home. That at home I was—" She chose the word carefully. "Difficult." The apartment was very quiet. "He meant I was too much," she said. "Too internal. Too in my own head. Not warm enough, not easy enough, not enough of the right things." Her jaw tightened. "And after we ended it, I thought, he's right. I am difficult. And I went back to work and I stayed there for another year before I let anyone close enough to know whether he was right or not." She crossed back to the table. She stood rather than sitting. "And then I went on a blind date," she said. "And a man showed me a crayon drawing his 9-year-old put in his pocket for good luck. And I thought—" She stopped. "I thought, this is a person who is actually there. When he's in the room, he's in the room. He doesn't perform being present. He just is." She looked at him directly. "I have not experienced that in a long time." Mason looked up at her. "So when you tell me that Graham Holt makes more sense in a photo," she said, "what I hear is you telling me that you want me to choose the thing that looks right over the thing that is right. And I need you to understand—" Her voice broke slightly, just at the edge, then held. I have spent my entire life choosing the thing that looks right. I built an empire out of it. I am very, very tired of it. He stood up. He stood in her clean kitchen with the city behind her and the gray-blue bowl on the counter, and he looked at her. This exhausted, formidable, genuinely frightened woman. And he felt the fear in him go quiet. Not gone, just quiet. I'm sorry, he said, for pulling away. I know what that felt like. I shouldn't have. You were scared, she said. I was scared, he said. I'm still scared. Me too, she said. I am terrified every single time I drive to Delaney Street, because it matters, and things that matter can. She stopped. Go wrong, he finished. Yes. He moved toward her. He put his hands on either side of her face, which he had never done before, and she let him, and he said, I'm not going anywhere. I need you to know that. Whatever it looks like, whatever doesn't make sense in a photo, I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were too bright and her jaw was set, and she was very clearly not going to cry, had decided firmly that she was not going to do that, and he loved her for the stubbornness of it. He froze slightly, internally, at the word he'd just used, even just to himself. She leaned her forehead against his. Just that. Just the weight of it. They stayed like that for a moment, in the kitchen of the apartment that had nothing personal in it except a ceramic bowl with some keys, and the city went on forever outside the window, and Mason thought, you're in serious trouble. He thought it with full knowledge. He thought it without wanting it to be any different. They went back to the couch. They talked until past 11, and somewhere in the middle of it, the tightness went out of the room, and they were just two people again, sitting together in the way they'd learned to sit together, close, unguarded, occasionally funny in the dry way they'd developed for each other. Near the end of the evening, Victoria said, I need to tell you something about the board. Okay, there's a trip in February. 3 weeks in Singapore and Tokyo, investor meetings, a conference. She looked at her hands. I've been not mentioning it. How long have you known about it? Since November, she said. Victoria, I know, I should have. She stopped. I kept thinking I'd find a way to shorten it or restructure. I couldn't. She looked up. 3 weeks. He absorbed that. That's a long time. Yes, she said. Lily's going to be. I know, she said quietly. He looked at the window. 3 weeks. The longest they'd gone without seeing each other since October was 5 days. 3 weeks felt like an abstraction, a length of time that didn't fit against the scale of what had become ordinary. We'll manage, he said. Will you do the thing again? He looked at her. Will you? He asked. She thought about it seriously, which he appreciated. I don't know, she said honestly. I might. Distance does things to how I. She stopped. I might retreat. Then we talk about it before it gets too far, he said. Deal? She looked at him for a long moment. Deal, she said. He drove home at midnight. The January streets were empty and cold, and the city was quiet in the deep way it went quiet after midnight. He drove through it thinking about all the ways fear and love were practically indistinguishable from each other at this proximity, how you couldn't have one without constantly brushing against the other. He got home, checked on Lily, who was asleep with her arm across the new journal, fixed himself a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen window looking at the dark backyard. He thought about, I am terrified every single time I drive to Delaney Street. He held that for a minute, let it be as true as it was. Then he went to bed. February arrived with a gray persistence that felt personal. The days before Victoria's departure were ordinary days, work, Lily, the usual mechanics of their life, but they had a quality to them, an awareness of the countdown that sat beneath everything like a low note. Victoria came to the house the Sunday before she left. She and Lily sat at the kitchen table for most of the afternoon, the journal open, the pencils from the wooden case arranged in a specific order that Lily had determined was the correct working sequence. They were finishing something in the island nation, a peace agreement between the northern and southern provinces, brokered through the Joint Maritime Authority Lily had proposed months earlier, which now had a full charter that covered 3 pages of the journal. Mason cooked. He half listened to the conversation at the table, which had moved from the maritime charter to the question of whether the island nation should develop a national anthem, and if so, what the appropriate musical register was for a nation whose economy was based on the conceptual memory of shells. Minor key, Victoria said. Definitely. Why minor? Because the best anthems sound slightly sad. Makes people feel the weight of the place. Lily considered this with great seriousness. Do you know any anthems? A few. Sing one. A pause. I don't sing, Victoria said. Everyone sings. Not me. Why not? Because I'm... Another pause. Because I don't. That's not a reason, Lily said. Silence from the table. Mason kept his back turned to hide his expression. I sang once at a company retreat, Victoria said finally. Karaoke. It was not well received. What song? Lily asked. I'm not telling you that. Dad? Lily said. Can you make her tell us? No, Mason said from the stove. Why not? Because she said no means no, and also because I want to stay in her good graces. A small pause, and then Victoria laughed. The real one, unguarded, slightly surprised. And Lily made the quietly satisfied sound she made when she'd manufactured a moment she was proud of. Dinner was loud and ran long. Lily resisted the end of it the way she resisted any good thing ending, finding reasons to keep them at the table. One more thing about the Maritime Charter, a question about Singapore that had occurred to her, a detailed argument for why she should be allowed to stay up until 10 on a school night just this once, given that Victoria was leaving. That is not a thing, Mason said. It's a special circumstance, Lily said. The circumstance isn't special enough. Victoria's going to be gone for 3 weeks. Lily looked at Victoria. Tell him it's a special circumstance. Victoria looked at Mason with an expression that was carefully neutral, but had laughter hiding just behind it. I can't get involved in bedtime negotiations, she said. I have a policy. Since when? Lily said. Since this exact moment, Victoria said. Lily looked between them with the expression of someone recognizing an alliance and filing it away for future strategic reference. Fine, she said, but I'm not happy about it. Noted, Mason said. He carried her to bed at 9, which she accepted with the dignity of someone making a sacrifice. She hugged him for a long time at her door, longer than usual, and he held on. She's coming back, he said before she could ask. Lily pulled back and looked at him. I know, she said, but her voice had the quality it had when she was holding something she didn't want to show. 3 weeks, he said. It'll go fast. Lily looked at him with the skeptical, clear-eyed look of a 9-year-old who had a good understanding of how time actually moved. No, it won't, she said. No, he admitted. It won't, but we'll get through it. She hugged him once more, quickly, and then went into her room and closed the door. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he went back to the living room where Victoria was sitting on the couch, looking at the space Lily had just vacated with an expression that was doing several complicated things at once. He sat beside her. She'll be okay, he said. I know, Victoria said, but her voice had the same quality Lily's had had, the one that meant the words were true and also not the whole truth. He took her hand. She held on. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, she said. They sat together for a while longer, not talking much, just in the room together, the way they'd learned to be in rooms together. The Christmas tree was gone, but the corner still smelled faintly of pine. The dinosaur in the Santa hat was sitting on the shelf where Lily had put it after taking it off the tree, because she'd decided it lived there now. When Victoria left that night, she hugged him at the door. A real hug. Both arms, the kind that didn't have a performance in it. And he held on longer than he'd planned to. Call when you land, he said. You don't have to tell me to... I know, he said. Call anyway. She pulled back and looked at him with the expression that had been 40 things over the past 4 months. Guarded, then open, then scared, then real. And tonight it was simply, I will miss this. She didn't say it, but he saw it. I'll call, she said. She walked to her car. He stood on the porch under the lights that were still up because Lily had refused to let him take them down before February, and he watched the taillights disappear around the corner at the end of Delaney Street and the night was cold and still. He went inside. The house had the after-company quiet, not the hollow absence of Lily quiet, but the specific texture of a place where someone you wanted had just been. He checked Lily one more time, still asleep. He fixed her blanket, which had migrated, and stood in the doorway looking at her, the pencil she'd fallen asleep holding, the journal on the pillow, the improbable force of her. He thought about what was coming. 3 weeks, 2 people trying to hold on to something across 12 time zones, all the ways distance-tested things that felt solid from close up. He thought about Lily asking to stay up because Victoria was leaving, and Victoria declining to get involved in bedtime negotiations as a matter of policy, and the thing that had happened in that exchange, the comfortable, unspoken choreography of 2 people who had started to move around each other naturally, without planning it. He thought about how scared he still was, how he was probably going to be scared for a while yet, how the fear and the wanting had the same address, and you couldn't visit one without encountering the other. Then the fear arrived in a form he hadn't prepared for at all. It was late March, 5 weeks after Victoria had come home from Singapore, which had been hard, 3 weeks that stretched and frayed at the edges. A phone call where she'd been short with him about something that wasn't really about the thing it was about. A week of him reverting slightly to the managed distance, then a long, honest late-night call where they'd found each other again, that the Charity Autumn Festival arrived. Hail Tech's annual fundraiser for the Children's Hospital took over Riverside Park on a Saturday in late October. The same event Victoria had mentioned the previous year now arrived. It was a large production. Carnival games and lights strung between the old oak trees, food vendors, and a stage. The kind of event that was simultaneously a genuine community gathering and an extremely expensive PR operation, and Victoria moved through it with the practiced dual consciousness of someone who was both genuinely present and never entirely off the clock. Mason came with Lily, who'd been vibrating with anticipation for 2 days on the basis of carnival games alone. They met Victoria near the entrance, and Lily immediately surveilled the layout of the event with the strategic intensity of a general assessing terrain before announcing a prioritized list of target attractions. Ferris wheel first, she said, then the ring toss, then the kettle corn if there's any. Ring toss is rigged, Mason said. I know, Lily said. I'm still going to win. Victoria was watching Lily with the expression she'd been wearing more consistently over the past months, openly fond, unguarded, the look that had replaced the careful distance. She was in a charcoal coat, and her hair was down, and she looked, Mason thought, like herself. The Delaney Street version, the version that had been slowly, over the course of a year, becoming the primary one. She had board members to greet and donor conversations to navigate, and a short speech to give at 7, and she did all of it. Mason watched her from various distances, this woman in her professional element, moving through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this a long time. But she kept coming back. To him and Lily, returning from a cluster of people to find them at a game booth or eating something on a bench. And the way she came back had nothing performed in it, just the straightforward gravity of a person who knows where they want to be. It was Lily who went missing. It happened the way these things happen. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but in the particular way a child disappears in a crowd, which is gradually and then all at once. One moment she was beside Mason at the edge of the ring toss booth, then the crowd thickened slightly, then he turned around and she wasn't there. He called her name once, calmly, and got nothing back. Called again, louder, and the specific cold dread of a parent in a crowd moved up through his chest like water rising. He turned in all directions, scanning the bobbing heads and the carnival lights, and the moving bodies of 1,000 people who were not his daughter. Victoria appeared at his shoulder. She read his face in under a second. How long? She said. 2 minutes, maybe 3. He was already moving. She was right here. They split without discussing it. A year of knowing each other had produced its own shorthand. Victoria went left, toward the stage and the main path. Mason went right, toward the periphery of the park, where the lights were sparser and the crowd thin toward the water. He called Lily's name. Again. His voice was steady, but his heart was doing something mechanical and urgent in his chest, and the carnival lights around him had taken on the specific surreal quality of a world slightly tilted off its axis. He found her 12 minutes later. She was sitting on the wooden dock at the edge of the park's lakeside, her feet hanging over the water, a small notebook on her lap. Not the journal, a smaller one she carried in her jacket pocket for quick drawings. She was drawing. The carnival lights were strung through the trees behind her, and their reflections moved in the water below. She looked up when she heard his footsteps on the dock. "Hi, Dad," she said. He stood at the end of the dock for a moment, letting his heartbeat regulate, breathing deliberately. "Lily." "I found the good light," she said, as if this were a complete explanation. She turned the notebook to show him, a drawing of the water, the hanging lights, their reflections. "You can't—" He stopped, got to his knees, which put him at her level. "You can't walk away without telling me. You know that." "I didn't walk away. I found a better spot." "Lily." His voice had the quality it got when he was very serious, and she needed to hear it. "When you walk away without telling me in a crowd, I don't know where you are. Do you understand what that does to me?" She looked at him, really looked the way she did when she was taking something in. "You were scared," she said. "Yes. I'm sorry," she said. She meant it. The lights on the water were so good, and you were looking at the ring toss, and I thought I'd just come here real quick. Tell me next time." "Okay." She paused. "Is Victoria looking too?" "Yes." Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out her small phone, the basic one he'd gotten her for emergencies, and texted something. A minute later, footsteps on the dock. Victoria appeared, slightly out of breath, coat open. She looked at Lily. Then she looked at the notebook in Lily's lap, and something went out of her shoulders, the tension releasing all at once. She sat down on the dock on Lily's other side, which put her beside him and beside Lily, both of them looking at this child swinging her feet over the dark water. The three of them were quiet for a moment. The carnival went on behind them in the trees. A light breeze came off the lake. Then Lily looked at both of them, at Victoria, then at Mason, with the specific focused look she brought to things she'd been thinking about. "Why are both of you acting lonely again?" she said. The dock was very still. Mason looked at Victoria over the top of Lily's head. Victoria looked back. The question sat between all three of them, small and precise and devastating in the way Lily's observations tended to be. Not because she'd meant it to be devastating, but because she'd asked the exact true thing. Because the past several months had been real. The best kind of real. And underneath all of it, in the parts neither of them said out loud, there had still been the careful hedging, the slightly managed distance, the habits of two people who had been hurt and had learned to protect themselves before getting attached, the habits of two lonely people who had found each other and still, despite everything, kept waiting for the other shoe. Lily was looking at her drawing of the water lights. "You were both happy," she said, "all the time at the house. And then sometimes you both get this look." She didn't elaborate on what the look was. She didn't need to. "Priya's parents have the same look," she said. "They got divorced last year." Mason took a breath. "We're not," he started. "I know you're not," Lily said, with a patience that was mildly insulting from a 9-year-old. "I'm saying I don't want you to get the look." She looked up at Victoria. "You don't come over when you're doing the look. You stay away." Then she looked at Mason. "And you make bad coffee and don't answer your phone on the first ring." She looked back at her drawing. "It's very obvious," she said. I'm 9, not 4. The lake moved below them. The lights in the trees strung their gold reflections across the water. Victoria was very still beside Lily. Her hand rested on the dock, close to Lily's knee, and after a moment Lily reached over without looking and put her hand on top of Victoria's. That was all. Just that. Mason looked at the two of them beside him, his daughter, who saw everything, and this woman who had walked into a restaurant 11 months ago and said 5 words that had changed the shape of everything, and the thing he'd been managing and hedging and protecting against for most of those 11 months sat up inside him and refused to be managed anymore. He was tired of the distance. He was tired of the waiting for the shoe. He was tired of treating the best thing in his recent life like a liability. He didn't say any of it yet. The dock wasn't the right place. The carnival lights and Lily's notebook weren't the right circumstances. There were things that needed saying, things he owed Victoria, that she owed him, that they owed each other for the months of almost and not quite and careful retreat. But sitting there on the dock in the October dark, with his daughter's hand on Victoria's and the carnival behind them and the city glittering in the water below, He knew that the conversation was coming, that they were going to have to finally stand still and say the things they'd been orbiting for almost a year. He wasn't afraid of it anymore. Or he was, but less than he was everything else. "Come on," he said to Lily. "We're missing the kettle corn." Lily looked at him, assessed. Whatever she found in his face seemed to satisfy her because she closed the notebook and stood up, brushing dock debris from her jacket with the brisk efficiency of someone with places to be. She took both their hands as they walked back up the dock, his on the left, Victoria's on the right, and pulled them forward toward the lights. End of part 4. You said part 5, lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 5 lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu trò chuyện uyển ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, có quan điểm cá nhân, thông điệp, bài học, góc nhìn con người. Nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo. Phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document. Chỉ đần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu.
Showmore 958. Claude responded, Part 5, what stays?
Part 5, what stays? They walked back into the carnival lights, Lily between them, holding both their hands with the unself-conscious grip of a child who had decided something and was not going to be argued out of it. The kettle corn cart was exactly where it had been, and Lily negotiated the largest bag available with the focused authority of someone who had earned it, and they stood together near the edge of the lights eating kettle corn while the festival moved around them and the lake sat dark and still at their backs. Mason watched Lily drift toward a nearby game booth, close enough to see, far enough to give them a moment. Victoria was looking at the lake. Her hands were in her coat pockets. He could see the slight tension in her jaw that meant she was holding something, turning it over, doing what she did when a feeling had arrived that she hadn't figured out how to file yet. "She's not wrong," Victoria said quietly. Not to him specifically, more like admitting it to the air. "No," he said. "She's almost never wrong." Victoria looked at him. What do we do with that? He thought about the answer he would have given 3 months ago. Something measured, something careful, some version of "I think we should talk about it" that would have held the real thing at arm's length a little longer. He'd gotten good at that. He'd been practicing it for 11 months. "I think we stop waiting for it to fall apart," he said. She looked at him. "I think we stop treating it like something that's probably going to go wrong," he said, "because I've been doing that. And I think you've been doing it too. And it's..." He looked at Lily, who was trying to toss a ring over a bottle with the focused intensity of someone who had studied the physics. "It's exhausting, and it's not fair to either of us." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. The carnival went on around them. Someone won something at a nearby booth, and there was a small cheer. And the lights moved in the wind. "I don't know how to not do it," she said. "The waiting for it to go wrong." She said it plainly, without apology, the way she said the true things. "It's been the default for a long time." "I know," he said. "Same." "So how do we..." "We just don't," he said. "We decide not to, and then when we start doing it, we say so, out loud, instead of going quiet." He looked at her. "The way we should have been doing it all along, instead of me pulling away and you photographing my window from the street." The corner of her mouth moved, the almost smile. "I told you that in confidence." "You told me that in my kitchen," he said. The kitchen doesn't have confidentiality. She looked at him for another moment. Something in her expression moved through several things and settled on something that was simpler than most of the expressions he'd cataloged over the past year. Something close to resolved. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Okay?" she said again, and this time it landed differently. Not tentative, not hedged, just decided. He reached over and put his arm around her shoulders, and she turned into it, and they stood together at the edge of the Hail Tech Charity Carnival, watching his daughter fail to toss a ring over a bottle and refuse to accept the failure, and the night was cold and clear and full of imperfect light. What happened over the following weeks was not a transformation. It was not a dramatic shift or a sudden arrival. It was something quieter and more durable than that. The slow process of two people who had made a decision and were now learning day by day what that decision actually required of them. It required honesty at times when deflection would have been easier. It required Mason saying, one Thursday evening in November, that he'd had a bad week and wasn't very good company, and would she rather reschedule? And Victoria saying no, she'd come anyway, and sitting with him in the kitchen while he was quiet and not trying to fix the quiet. It required Victoria calling him from Tokyo on a layover at 2 a.m, her time, and saying she was second-guessing a board decision and needed to think out loud, and Mason listening from his truck in a parking lot where he'd pulled over because the call mattered more than where he was going. It required both of them making the specific, unglamorous choice, repeatedly, to stay in it on the days when staying was harder than it looked. It required Lily, who observed all of it with the attentiveness she brought to everything that mattered, and said nothing for weeks except to note, one Saturday morning at breakfast, that the house felt different. "Different how?" Mason said. "Fuller," she said. She poured too much syrup on her pancakes and didn't notice. "Like when you fixed the heating last winter and the whole house was warmer. Like that, but not temperature." He looked at her for a moment. "Are you comparing my relationship to a working furnace?" "A really good furnace," Lily said, with the gravity of someone offering a genuine compliment. December arrived with its cold and its urgency and the particular emotional weight that the end of a year tends to generate. The accounting, the looking back, the calculation of what had been lost and what had been gained. Mason sat with this accounting on a Thursday evening in mid-December, while Lily was at Karen's, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of the better coffee he now kept in the house, looking at nothing. 1 year, roughly. 1 year since a blind date at Aldrich's that he'd almost skipped. He thought about who he'd been 12 months earlier, the version of himself who had driven to a restaurant he couldn't afford in a blue shirt his daughter had chosen, and stood at the host stand feeling like a man wearing someone else's shoes. He thought about how contained that man had been, how efficiently he'd organized his life around the twin purposes of survival and Lily, how little space he'd left for anything that might crack the container. He thought about the crack, about 5 words at a restaurant door, and a crayon drawing on a white tablecloth, and a woman who had carried a faded piece of paper in her purse for 13 years. About farmers' markets and pottery booths, and a child taking a stranger's hand. About bad coffee and a socket set, and a hole in the armrest that still hadn't been fixed. About Singapore and the 3 weeks that stretched and frayed, and a parking garage call at midnight, and coming back together the way things that have been pulled apart come back. Not seamlessly, with the evidence of the strain still visible, but together. He thought about a dock in October dark, and a 9-year-old asking why they were acting lonely. He thought about standing at the edge of the carnival lights and saying we stop waiting for it to fall apart, and meaning it. And then, harder, more important, more real, doing it. His phone buzzed. "Victoria. Are you home?" He typed back, "Kitchen. Why?" 3 dots, then, "I'm outside. I have something. Can I come in?" He went to the door. She was on the porch in her coat, and she had something in her hands. A small paper bag, the kind from a bakery. She looked slightly nervous, which was unusual for her, and the nervousness made her look younger, less polished, more like herself. "I was nearby," she said, which they both knew was not quite true, because nobody was nearby Delaney Street on a random Thursday without intending to be. "Come in," he said. She came in. She stood in the hallway and looked around the house the way she sometimes still did when she arrived. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because it seemed to be something she needed, that moment of just being in it. The drawings on the refrigerator, the boots by the door, Lily's rain boots because she was at Karen's but they always stayed at home. The one overhead light that was, and had been, and had become a fixture of their ongoing dynamic, still out. "You never fixed it," she said, looking at the ceiling. "I keep forgetting." "You haven't forgotten. You've decided the lamp is fine." "The lamp is fine. The lamp is—" She stopped. Something shifted in her expression. "I bought you a bulb," she said. "It's in the bag." He looked at the bag. "You brought me a light bulb." "And a croissant," she said, "from the place on Meridian." He took the bag. He looked in it. One standard bulb, wrapped in tissue for reasons that were genuinely unnecessary but very Victoria, and a croissant from the good bakery. He stood in the hallway of his house holding a bag containing a light bulb and a croissant and felt something enormous moving through him, quiet and specific and unnamed. "Thank you," he said. "It's a bulb." "I know." He looked at her. "That's not what I meant." She looked back at him. She understood what he meant. She always understood. That was one of the things about her, one of the qualities he'd spent the past year cataloging and still hadn't finished cataloging. "There's something I need to say," he said. "Okay." "I've been carrying around a version of myself that was small," he said. "Not literally, but organized around not wanting too much, around keeping the footprint small so that if things went wrong, the damage was contained." He set the bag on the hallway table. "I did it for Lily, partly, but I also did it for me, because wanting too much and not getting it, I knew what that felt like, and I decided I was done with it." Victoria was listening, not moving, just completely there. "And then you walked into Aldrich's," he said, "and I started wanting things again before I knew it was happening, and it scared me, and I handled the fear. Not well." He met her eyes. "I kept waiting for you to realize you'd made a mistake. I kept handing you reasons to. Pulling away, manufacturing distance, being so careful that I was almost careful enough to ruin it." He stopped. "I'm done with that. I'm done with the small version. I don't want to do it anymore." He reached into his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying it for 3 days, waiting for the right moment, telling himself there was no right moment, deciding to do it anyway. He placed it on the hallway table beside the bag. It was a key, not wrapped, not presented. Just a key, set down plainly, the way he'd set down his tools at the end of a long job. Ordinary, specific, real. Victoria looked at it. She was still for a moment. Her breath shifted slightly. He caught it, and then she looked up at him. "That's a house key?" she said. "Yeah." "To this house." "I'm aware of whose house it is." She looked at him. Her composure was doing its thing. The seam showing, the thing that happened when a feeling was too large for the container she usually kept it in. "Mason, you don't have to use it every day," he said. "You don't have to use it any specific amount. It's just—" He paused, found the words. "It's just so you know that you don't have to stand on the porch. You're not a guest here." He looked at her steadily. "You haven't been a guest for a while. I should have said so sooner." She picked up the key. She held it in her palm and looked at it the way she sometimes looked at the faded paper in her purse. Not casually, not glancingly, but with the full weight of her attention. "Lily knows?" she asked. "Lily suggested it," he said. 3 weeks ago. She said, and I'm quoting, that it was inefficient for you to always have to wait on the porch." Victoria's composure finally did what it had been trying not to do for the better part of this conversation. It didn't break. That wasn't how she worked. But it opened. Her eyes went bright, and she looked down at the key in her palm, and she let herself have whatever was moving through her, right there in his hallway, and she didn't try to manage it into something smaller. He stepped forward and put his arms around her. She leaned into it, not collapsing. She was not a collapsing person, but with the specific quality of weight that meant she was letting herself be held, which was different and more significant. "I've been so afraid," she said into his shoulder, quietly, "for so long. Not just with you, just in general, of things mattering and then being gone." She took a breath. Emil mattered more than anything, and then she was gone, and I genuinely thought that the solution was to stop letting things matter that much again. "I know," he said. "It's not a solution," she said. "Obviously, I knew it wasn't. Another breath. It was easier than the alternative. I know, he said again. I did the same thing. Different shape, same thing. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were bright, and her composure was open, and she was, he thought, one of the most real people he had ever been close to. Not because she was uncomplicated, not because she was easy, but because underneath all the built architecture of her public self, underneath the career and the composure and the years of running, there was just a person. A person who had lost someone she loved and built an empire to outrun the grief, and driven past a small house on Delaney Street and photographed the lit window because she wanted something she was afraid to want. I love you, he said. He said it the way he said the true things, plainly, without decoration, without the buildup of someone delivering a prepared line, just the fact of it. She looked at him. He watched it move through her, the thing he'd said, watched it find its way past all the places she'd built to redirect exactly this kind of thing and land somewhere it apparently hadn't landed in a long time. I love you, she said back, and she said it the same way, without performance, without the careful management of emphasis. Just true. They stood in the hallway of the house on Delaney Street, under the one working light, and the night was quiet around them, and the key was in her hand and nothing was fixed. All of it was still complicated and still imperfect and still going to require work and honesty and the occasional 3 a.m. call from a Tokyo layover. But it was theirs. That was the thing. It was entirely, imperfectly, actually theirs. The Christmas that followed was different from the last one in the particular way that things are different when the thing underneath has changed. Not the surface. Lily still supervised the lights from below, still insisted on the specific arrangement of the ornaments, still went to bed late and got up early and filled the house with the relentless running commentary of a person who treated the world as endlessly interesting. Not the surface, the underneath. Victoria used the key for the first time on Christmas Eve morning, while Mason was at the garage finishing a job before the holiday closure. She let herself in and found Lily at the kitchen table with a project. She was making ornaments, hand-cut from cardboard, and painted in careful, specific colors, each one representing something. There was one that was clearly a shell, painted in layers of cream and gold, for the island nation's currency. There was one shaped like a miniature journal. There was one that Lily was currently painting a careful blue-gray, and when Victoria sat down across from her and asked what it was, Lily said without looking up, "It's the bowl, the one you bought at the farmer's market." Victoria looked at the small cardboard circle being transformed into a ceramic bowl shape with careful paint strokes. "You're making an ornament of my bowl," she said. "It's important," Lily said simply. "Important things go on the tree." Victoria sat with that for a moment. Outside, the December sky was the flat white of a city, holding its breath before snow. "Can I help?" Victoria said. Lily handed her a piece of cardboard and the scissors. "I'm making one more," she said. "I couldn't figure out what shape to make it. Maybe you have an idea." Victoria held the cardboard. She thought about it. She thought about what belonged on the tree, what was important enough, what the shape would be of the thing she'd been carrying and the things she'd been given and the place she'd arrived. "A piece of paper," she said, "folded." Lily looked up. She looked at Victoria with the full inventory look. Then she nodded, grave, satisfied. The look of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. "I'll cut it," she said. "You should paint it." Mason came home at 2 p.m. to find them at the kitchen table surrounded by cardboard scraps and paint, the tree already rearranged to accommodate 3 new ornaments, Lily narrating the significance of each addition to Victoria with the focus of a docent guiding a tour. Victoria was listening, her jacket off, a small smear of blue-gray paint on the back of her hand. And she looked up when Mason came in, and the look on her face was something he hadn't seen in it before. Or maybe he had. Maybe it had been growing there for months. But this was the first time it was entirely unguarded, entirely unheld. Just, I am here. I am exactly where I want to be. He stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and let that settle into him. "You're late," Lily said. "We almost started without you for the tree." "The tree is already rearranged," he said. "The base arrangement needed updating," Lily said. "Victoria and I made new ornaments." He came to the table and looked at the ornaments, the shell, the journal, the gray-blue bowl, and a small square of folded paper painted carefully white with faint fold lines in gray, that hung by a thread on the lowest branch of the tree. He picked it up, looked at it, looked at Victoria. "Lily's idea," Victoria said. "More or less." "Less," Lily said. "It was more Victoria's idea. I just said to make something important." He set the small painted paper back on its branch. Then he went to the cabinet and got the step stool because there was a bulb that had been out since approximately the previous February, and he was finally going to replace it. He climbed the step stool, unscrewed the dead bulb. Lily watched him with the expression of someone observing a significant historical moment. "Finally," she said. "I've been busy," he said. "You've been forgetting," she said. "I've been busy forgetting," he said. Victoria handed him the new bulb from the bag she'd brought 3 weeks earlier, which had been sitting on the counter since then in the specific way that things sit on his counter when he's waiting to have a moment. He screwed it in, flipped the switch. The kitchen went fully bright. Lily looked up at the light. Then she looked at Mason on the step stool and at Victoria below him and said, with the specific tone of a person who had been patient about something and was now entitled to register the length of the wait, "It took you long enough." "Most things do," Mason said. "Is that a lesson?" He climbed down from the step stool. He looked at his daughter, who was 9 years old, and had the patience of someone much older and the clarity of vision that some people spent their whole lives looking for and never quite finding. "Yeah," he said, "that's a lesson." What followed Christmas was winter in the way that the city did winter, with gray persistence and cold that found the gaps in your coat and the particular cabin fever energy of a 9-year-old who wanted to go outside but whose threshold for cold had limits. Victoria's apartment became, gradually, a second location. Not a replacement, not a primary residence, but somewhere between those things. She kept a drawer at the house on Delaney Street without ever discussing it, and Mason kept a charger at her apartment, and Lily considered both places hers with the unquestioning practicality of a child who doesn't see the ideological complexity in arrangements that simply work. Victoria's board noticed the change in her, not the specific facts of it. She kept her personal life out of the boardroom with the same deliberateness she'd always maintained, but the general quality of her, the slight unbinding of the composure, the occasional smile in a meeting that arrived without occasion, a decision-making process that had always been fast becoming slightly more grounded, less driven by the relentless forward momentum of someone running, more by someone who had somewhere to stand still. Her COO, a woman named Priya, who had known Victoria for 7 years and said what she thought as a professional policy, told her in a January check-in that she seemed different. Victoria looked at her across the conference table. "Different how?" "Like a person," Priya said. Victoria thought about Mason saying those exact words to her on a Tuesday morning at Patsy's Diner over bad coffee in what felt like another life. "I'll take it," she said. Priya smiled. "Good," she said. "It looks better on you." The faded paper, which Victoria had carried for 6 years in her purse, with the careful, somewhat irrational fidelity of a woman who was not ready to let it represent something fixed and over. The paper moved. Not thrown away. Not put in a box. It moved from the inside pocket of her purse to the small wooden box on her bedroom nightstand. A box she'd had since college that held specific things. A photo of her and Emil from a beach vacation when Emil was 16, laughing at something out of frame. A stub from the first professional event she'd ever attended. A note in her own handwriting that said, "You know what you're doing," that she'd written to herself at 25 and sometimes still needed. She put the paper in the box carefully, next to the photo. She looked at them together for a moment, Emil at 16 caught mid-laugh, and the small handwritten voice of that same girl saying, "It's okay to cry, I'll stay." She closed the box. Not an ending, not a putting away, just a resting place. The recognition that the grief and the love that had been carrying it were not things she needed to keep in her pocket anymore to keep them alive. They were already built into her, had been building into her for 6 years, had shaped everything she'd become, including this kitchen, this child, this man on Delaney Street who had looked at her across a restaurant table and not been impressed by the wrong things. She told Mason about it one evening, simply while they were doing dishes. Him washing, her drying, Lily somewhere in the house narrating something to herself in the specific low murmur she used when she was deep in a story. She told him she'd put it in the box. He turned the water off and looked at her. She looked back. "How does it feel?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Like something got lighter," she said, "and heavier at the same time, which doesn't make sense." "It makes sense," he said. He turned the water back on. "That's just what it feels like when you stop holding something at arm's length." She dried the glass in her hands. She thought about that. "You've done this before," she said. "Had to put things down?" "Let things become real instead of keeping them at a safe distance." He was quiet for a moment, scrubbing a pan. "Lily," he said, "when she was born, I was so scared that I kept not looking directly at her. Like if I looked directly at how much she meant to me, it would break something." He rinsed the pan. "Then one morning, she was just looking up at me. 6 weeks old, just looking. And I thought, there's no point. You already love her. You've already lost. The distance isn't protecting anything. It's just costing you time." Victoria set down the dried glass carefully. "She was 6 weeks old and she already had your number," she said. "She's always had my number," he said. He handed her the pan. "She's got yours too, by the way, in case you hadn't noticed." "I noticed," Victoria said, "in September at the farmer's market." She dried the pan. "When she took my hand." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I was watching." The winter got old, and then, in the way of winters, it started letting go. February brought the tentative first signals, a slightly longer evening, a day that didn't feel like a test of endurance, and then March arrived with mud and the smell of things working themselves back to life under the cold ground. On a Saturday in late March, a rainy one, Lily sat at the kitchen table with both drawings in front of her. She'd asked for them specifically, with the focused intentionality she brought to significant projects. Mason's folded crayon drawing from his jacket pocket at Aldrich's, and the old faded paper from Victoria's wooden box, which Victoria had brought over when Lily asked, without hesitation. Both drawings were flat on the table. Lily looked at them for a long time. Mason leaned in the kitchen doorway. Victoria sat at the table beside Lily, watching. "They match," Lily said. "Not in the sense of identical. They looked nothing alike. One a child's bright crayon work with gold stars, one a small faded sketch with a 6-year-old's uncertain lines. Not like twins, like they're answering each other." "What do you mean?" Victoria said. Lily pointed to Emil's drawing, the small standing figure with its arm extended toward the hunched one. "This one says, 'I'll stay.'" She moved her finger to her own drawing, the two figures leaning slightly toward each other beneath the stars. "Mine says she might be lonely too. It's like one of them says it's okay to need someone, and the other one says look for the person who needs you back." The kitchen was quiet, rain on the window. Mason looked at his daughter. At this person he had been building his life around for 9 years, this person who was made of crayon drawings and fictional monetary systems and rain boots, regardless of weather, and a specific quality of attention that saw things other people missed. He thought about being 23 and afraid and looking at a 6-week-old who looked back at him and knowing, in the bone, that the distance wasn't protecting anything. He thought about everything that had required of him, the staying, the not running, the repeated daily choice to be present, and how it had produced this specific human who was now sitting at his kitchen table having a more sophisticated insight about loneliness and connection than most adults managed in a lifetime. He thought about what it had cost and what it had built. "You're right," Victoria said quietly. Her voice was careful in the way it got when something had found its way through. "That's exactly what they're saying." Lily looked at them both. Then she picked up a piece of tape. She'd clearly come prepared, and stood up and walked to the refrigerator. She moved 2 magnets, the pineapple and the state of Ohio, and put Emil's drawing up first, carefully, pressing each corner. Then she put her own drawing beside it, corners pressed, edges nearly touching. She stepped back and looked at them. "There," she said, the word of someone completing something, finishing an arrangement that has been waiting for its final element. Mason looked at the refrigerator. 2 drawings. One from a girl who had slipped it under a door to a 17-year-old sister in the dark of a difficult year. One from a 9-year-old who had tucked it into her father's jacket pocket on a blind date she'd been rooting for before it began. Side by side on a refrigerator covered in magnets and school drawings, and the accumulated evidence of a life lived fully in one place. He thought about what Lily had said, the drawings answering each other. It's okay to need someone and look for the person who needs you back. He had spent 8 years mostly not looking. Not because he needed the way anyone needs. The way loneliness is not an absence but a specific presence, a weight you carry and call something else. But because the looking felt dangerous, felt like the beginning of another loss he couldn't afford. He had organized his life around the things he could control and called it enough. And then a 9-year-old had laid out his shirt and tucked a drawing in his pocket. And he had gone, reluctantly, to a restaurant he couldn't afford. And a woman had said 5 words at the door that broke open. Something he'd sealed shut so long ago he'd forgotten it had ever been open. None of it had been smooth. None of it had gone without friction, without the specific friction of 2 people with real damage trying to build something real in spite of it. There had been managed distances and midnight fears, and a parking lot in Singapore, and a dock in October dark, and a photo taken from the street. There had been the enormous ordinary courage of saying I love you plainly in a hallway and meaning it without any safety net under it. The damage was still there. It always would be, in the way that damage is always there, not as a wound after time, but as a shape. The shape of the things that had happened, the losses and the years and the choices made in fear that needed to be unmade. The faded fold lines of a piece of paper carried for 6 years. The 8 years of a man who'd organized himself small. But here was the thing Mason had learned. The thing he was still learning would keep learning, because these things don't arrive all at once but in installments over years. That the damage and the love were not in competition. The damage did not disqualify the love. The shape that grief had given you was not a wrongness to be corrected. It was just a shape. And if you were lucky, you found another person whose shape fit against yours in a way that didn't require either of you to pretend to be different than you were. Victoria came to stand beside him in the kitchen doorway. She was looking at the refrigerator too. He felt her hand find his. Not reaching, not deliberate, just the natural motion of her hand knowing where his was. He closed his fingers around hers. She's going to figure out everything, Victoria said quietly, about Lily. About the island nation and the maritime authority and the shell-based economy and everything that came after. Probably, he said. She's already halfway there. Lily was still looking at the 2 drawings on the refrigerator with the expression of someone who has placed a last piece and is looking at the completed thing. The pineapple magnet held Emil's drawing. The ceramic cat with the missing ear held Lily's. Side by side, slightly crooked, the way things end up when they're put up by human hands in real kitchens. Outside the window, the March rain was letting up. The light through the glass was the changing kind. The kind that moves as cloud breaks apart, that shifts the room in increments from gray to something warmer. It came slowly, the way spring always came, unannounced and impermanent and true. Lily finally turned around. She looked at her father and at Victoria, both of them in the doorway, and she said nothing, just looked, with the clear, serious, complete attention that was the most purely Lily thing about her. Then she appeared to satisfy whatever internal accounting she was doing, and she turned back to the table where her journal and her pencils were waiting, and she sat down and opened to a new page. She picked up a pencil and began to draw. Mason watched her for a moment, the bent head, the focused quiet, the world inside her taking shape again on a blank page. Then he looked out the window at the rain going still and the light beginning its slow change. Victoria's hand in his. The kitchen that smelled like coffee and old wood and the faint residue of last night's dinner. The refrigerator covered in the evidence of their life. The light coming through the glass, uncertain and getting warmer. He didn't have a word for it, the thing that this was. Not happiness exactly. Not the uncomplicated version, not the kind that doesn't know what it cost. Something more specific than that. The kind of feeling that can only come from having been very lost and then not being lost anymore, and knowing the difference, and not taking the not lost for granted. The kind that doesn't feel like an arrival so much as a choice you make every day. The choice to stay. The choice to look at the thing directly instead of at a safe angle. The choice to be in the room, in the kitchen, in the imperfect ordinary fullness of a life that had become, without ceremony, without any single moment you could point to. Without the light bulb finally getting fixed or the key on the hallway table or the drawings side by side on the refrigerator, but through all of those things together, accumulated, the way lives actually build themselves. His, theirs, real. Outside, the last of the rain came down, and the light through the kitchen window kept changing, and Lily drew, and the house on Delaney Street held them all in its ordinary, imperfect way, the way houses do when they're actually lived in, when the people inside them have stopped pretending to be smaller than they are. The crooked Christmas lights were still on the porch, technically. He'd forgotten to take them down before March. He'd probably leave them there until April. Some things, he had learned, you leave up a little longer than you planned. Not because you've forgotten, because the light is good.